In my first life, I died old and broken, alone in a heap of corpses. My whole family slaughtered down to the children and the pets, by Hua Mugi, the immortal martial god who had devoured the entire martial world. Then the great regression technique tore time open, and I woke in my teenage body on the day I lost the new demon skirmish, a whole life of foreknowledge and martial mastery riding behind my eyes. The man fate had shoved around his whole life had come back to take everything. Take 5 seconds to like and subscribe. The algorithm has a soft spot for both, and so do I. But none of this happened overnight. Let me start from the day it all broke open. Spirit Master Xiaogong stared in silence at the visitor who had come to him at midnight. As master of the Gui Gate, he had met every kind of intruder over a lifetime walking the Sword Mountain and the Blade Forest. The confident, the meticulous, the fine fighters, the cunning, and not one had ever left this manor breathing. But this man was different, and looking into those weary eyes that had tasted every bitter flavor a life could hold, only one dry thought surfaced, that perhaps today was his own death anniversary. He swallowed the dread and asked whether they had met before. The man said no, in a voice low and oddly pleasant, and when Xiaogong asked what brought him here at such an hour, the man said only that he had a request. The Spirit Master, who had felt the gates of hell yawn behind his back, let out a breath of relief and told him to speak. And then came the most astonishing request he had ever heard. The man asked to be sent into the past. In the silence that followed, Xiaogong asked how a human could turn back time, and the man said Xiaogong was the one who could wield the great regression technique, so he should be the one to know. The Spirit Master did not deny it, only asked how the man could know he was able to perform an art passed down within his family alone. The man gave a single name, Xiao Jin. That name, the one Xiaogong had longed to hear for years, washed over him like a flood. The man explained she had been a companion during his wandering days, and that she was dead. The breath left the old master in a long, broken sigh. He and his sister had worked from childhood to complete the technique their father could not, until 10 years ago she broke under its weight and fled in something close to a midnight escape, and he had understood because she had poured the whole of her 20s into it for the family's cause. The man told him not to worry about revenge, that he had already taken care of it, then delivered the words she had left behind, that she had lived without regret, and hoped Xiaogong would do the same, that he would for once live his own life rather than spend it buried in the technique. The Spirit Master sank into quiet remorse, and the man waited until he had composed himself before asking what mattered most, whether the technique was finished. Xiaogong nodded slowly and said that in his own generation, at last he had completed it. Joy flashed across the man's face, and when he smiled openly like that it was plain he was handsome. But there was no telling what point the man could return to, Xiaogong warned. Perhaps 10 years back, perhaps 30, perhaps to infancy, perhaps with poor luck no further than yesterday. The man said he was a fortunate sort, and the Spirit Master answered with bitterness that the technique was impossible regardless, because if it were truly possible he would have gone back himself long ago. He had completed it, yes, but he had never gathered all the materials. The man said simply that he would gather them. Of the 99, Xiaogong said, 5 had always been beyond him, and the first was a thing no one could ever hold. The Thunderbell, sacred treasure of the Heavenly Wind cult, that successor to the Blood sect which held the greatest power in the wilderness. The technique needed the sound waves the bell produced when rung, and it sat behind the throne of the cult's hot-tempered leader, who would wipe out Xiaogong's whole family for so much as asking to borrow it. The man said he would get it, and left before Xiaogong could raise a hand to stop him. Is he insane? The Spirit Master thought, regretting at once that he had not asked more about his sister. Several years later, on a sleepless night, Xiaogong saw him again like a figure out of a midsummer dream, the great Thunderbell strapped across his back. The Spirit Master examined it again and again, stunned past words, because there was no mistaking the faint flow of the blood sect's energy through the metal. This was a genuine Thunderbell. The man only said he was a man of his word, and asked for the next material, and Xiaogong sighed, because lucky or not he would never manage it. The divine incense brazier of the divine dragon family, that strongest of the new righteous powers risen after the martial alliance closed its gates. Said to be greater even than the Heavenly Wind cult. The man said he would hear the third once he brought the brazier back, and when Xiaogong asked what would stop him from running off with the Thunderbell, the man answered he would just tell the Heavenly Wind cult who had stolen it. Then he hurried off again. Every year, Xiaogong wondered whether this would be the year the man failed. Until one autumn the man returned carrying the divine incense brazier. The Spirit Master could not believe it even with the thing before his eyes, and when he begged to hear the story, the man said writing it down would fill 5 or 6 books, and there was no time. What is it, Xiaogong wondered, that lets this man turn the impossible into the done thing, when with an ability like that he could have lived well in this very age? So he asked whether revenge was the reason, and the man said yes, that with all his skill he still could not have it in this life. Who then was an enemy great enough to make it impossible? A name came out of the man's mouth. Hua Mugi. The Spirit Master's breath caught. Hua Mugi carried 2 titles. The first was Sambon, a name that might have suited some venerable scholar, except that in his case the final syllable meant neither peak nor to serve. It meant to seal. The Justice Martial Alliance, sealed. The Unorthodox Alliance, sealed. The Heavenly Demon Cult, sealed. The leaders of the three greatest powers that held the martial world together all died by his hand, and every family and master who refused to bend the knee was slaughtered alongside them. So his second title was the greatest of all time. After sealing the three great houses, Hua Mugi declared his own home the supreme alliance of the world, and thousands of masters gathered round it, and those who watched him unify the martial world named him the immortal martial god. Xiao Gong burst out that even regression would not let the man beat such a foe, the greatest martial genius since the founding of the martial world. A man bestowed a heavenly martial body by the heavens. The man answered that he too had grown up called a genius, that he too had a heavenly martial body. Stunned, the spirit master asked at last who exactly this man was, and the man told him that the heavenly demon, the one Hua Mugi had killed, was his father. Xiao Gong reeled, for he had never dreamed this visitor was the son of the dead heavenly demon, and only now did all his earlier feats make sense. Asked how he had survived, the man loosened his robe to show a scar so terrible across his chest that Xiao Gong nearly cried out, and said that when he opened his eyes he had been lying in a heap of corpses, crawling free just before being buried alive with the rest. The reason he could not forgive Hua Mugi, the man went on, was not that the man had tried to kill him, nor killed his father, nor even his treacherous brother, because what was the loss in being killed when one's whole life was already steeped in demonic blood? It was that on that day Hua Mugi had not stopped at the servants and laborers who knew no martial arts. He had killed the children, killed even the dogs and cats the household kept, wiped out every living thing his eyes could find. Xiao Gong said it was a lie, and the man said whether or not he believed it was no concern of his, but the spirit master could feel the truth in it, because the man he knew would not lie about such a thing. Who Hua Mugi truly was no longer mattered. The man said, perhaps a great hero, perhaps someone worth applauding for cutting down the demonic cult, but to him only a merciless enemy who had butchered his family without a sliver of pity, and since he could not kill the man in this age, he had to go back and kill him then. And before he did, he had one question, why a man so strong had needed to murder even the children. On that day, he said, a hand over his chest, his guard had died shielding him, and left a hole right here, a friend who never had the chance to marry or even make a proper friend of her own, because she spent every day and night protecting him. So would Xiao Gong please stop wasting his precious time and name the third ingredient? Xiao Gong let out his deepest sigh since the man first walked in, and said this one he would never get. The core essence of a 10,000-year carp, last recorded 300 years ago, perhaps no longer existing anywhere in the world. The man called it a damn technique and asked, half in jest, whether he ought to just cut Xiao Gong down where he sat, then said he supposed he must hold his hand after coming this far, and told the old man to wait, that this one might take time. A carp is still a carp, he said, so it had to be in the water somewhere in this world, and he would find it. Watching that figure walk off toward the impossible once more, the spirit master decided the man's brother, and even his unknown name, were not so important after all. The merciless river of time flowed on. The world was still Hua Mugi's, and by every rumor he had only grown stronger, driving himself toward the ultimate truth of martial arts. 12 of his most devoted followers govern the world now, the 12 Zodiac Kings, and though the absolute master had unified the martial realm, life had only worsened, injustice running wild beneath those 12, those who pleased them rising to fame, and those who defied them losing their lives. The Martial Alliance, the Unorthodox Alliance, and the Demon Cult still could not lift their seclusion, since everyone agreed that as long as Hua Mugi drew breath their gates would stay shut. Just as the thought that the man must have died in some nameless valley grew too heavy to bear, the nameless visitor returned. He had been in his prime when they met, but now stood a middle-aged man with gray threading his hair, his face and body tanned dark, as if he had walked the whole earth, new scars marking him, yet his eyes unchanged, cold and clear, calm and deep. He held out a box that beyond all belief held the core essence of a 10,000-year carp. The thing truly exists, the spirit master breathed, and the man said he had searched every place a thing could be searched, that he could draw a map of the central plains with his eyes shut, and that the truly remarkable part was not finding it but not going mad in the doing. A strange thought crossed Xiao Gong then, that perhaps what sat in the box was not a carp's essence at all, but the man's own will made solid. A sky-blue resolve hardened to stone. When Xiao Gong asked whether he wanted to boast first, the man said he would boast later, after he killed that bastard and turned him into a mummy, and bragged about it for the rest of his life, just so all the world would know. It is strange to hear jokes like that from you, Xiao Gong said, wanting nothing more than to sit and laugh with this man of martial arts and of living. But the man was busy as always and asked for the fourth ingredient. Money, Xiao Gong said, and when the man asked how much, told him 5 million yang. The man's answer was the same as ever, that he would get it, and Xiao Gong knew even 10 billion yang would not change it. But the spirit master told him to wait, that he would cover the money himself from the hoard his family had saved across generations for this very technique, because its success was his family's long-cherished wish, as much as the man's own. The man thanked him with genuine warmth and asked whether they might share a drink, and Xiao Gong said he would have one and then go, and the man called him a heartless friend. They sat side by side on a rock in the yard, draining great cups and savoring the drink slow. When we first met, the man said both of us were full of fire. My body ages, Seogong answered, but my heart is the same. And the man said it was because he would return to his younger self, and whether he went back at 50 or 60 or 100, he was still the man who came that first day. His time stopped at that exact moment. If the technique works, Seogong said, might I ask one thing, that you come find me, and then, the old master let out a long breath, that you stop my marriage. At the unexpected request, the man burst into the first laugh Seogong had ever seen from him, and the old master insisted he wasn't joking, that it was worth more to him than 5 million yang, that he could live alone forever. Just do that for him. The man agreed, and after Seogong told him in which year the marriage was to happen, and made him swear it twice over, the man swore. The two finished off the rest of the liquor. When the man asked for the last ingredient, Seogong named it, the heavenly demon spirit, and at the words the man's eyes went dark. It's your late father's keepsake, Seogong said, and the man said he knew that his father had never let it leave his side, but that he did not have it and did not know where it was. If Hua Mugi held it, all the labor of these years would be wasted, and even with the cult by good fortune it would not be easily had, since the demonic cult was sealed now under a new leader who, believing the man dead, would try to kill him the moment he reappeared. Let's hope it's still with the cult, Seogong said, telling him not to take too long, that he was getting old. Don't die before I return, the man answered, and after draining his last cup, he left. Seogong stood a long while watching him vanish. The man who left that way did not come back. No word of any upheaval in the demonic cult reached the spirit master either, yet he always kept his ears strained. The years went on, Seogong aged, and the flower of death bloomed in his face, and even now he sat absent on the porch, his eyes drifting to the spot where the man used to stand. Then he rubbed at his eyes as though seeing a phantom, because someone was staggering toward him in obvious agony, and it was the very man who had left to fetch the last ingredient. He had changed beyond knowing, his face so ruined he looked like another person, his right eye gone and his left arm gone with it, his body soaked through with blood that still dripped. Seogong could not find a single word. The man handed over the heavenly demon spirit, collapsed where he stood, and with no strength left to answer how he had taken it, only murmured that they should go to the place where the technique could be performed. Seogong propped him up and led him to the chamber, where everything stood ready and only the final ingredient had been missing. He set the heavenly demon spirit in the center, and the moment the last piece settled, the formation blazed to life, strange images and characters wheeling around it. Seogong stood before it and began to chant. Blue and red light spread to envelop the space, the thunder bell tolled, and incense rose from the divine incense brazier, and as the chant climbed to its peak, the main ingredients fused into one, and a shimmering cluster of light took shape, like a doorway onto somewhere else. We did it, Seogong cried, his face overflowing, for it was the moment his family's centuries-old wish came true. He crossed to the man slumped unconscious against the pillar, and rather than wake him, spoke softly that he was sorry, truly sorry. He had made up his mind to take the regression for himself, the guilt all the sharper knowing how hard the man had labored to gather materials that could never be gathered again. And he promised he would find the man and warn him of the calamity to come, then rose toward the light, saying returning to the past had been his family's wish across all the generations, and his own too. Just as he was about to step into it, a low, weary voice came from behind, and the spirit master flinched and froze. His devil's hole pressure point had already been sealed, and he could not even tell when. The man he had thought unconscious had risen, asked how Seogong could do this to him of all people, and seized him by the throat, his eyes brimming with bitter hatred and a grief that ran deeper still, the old and frail neck feeling as though it would snap. Seogong choked out that he must have lost his mind, that he was sorry. Truly. He was certain the man would kill him, and thought that with anyone else it would not have mattered, but it should not have been him, because only Seogong knew how hard this man had worked and suffered. Then the man eased his grip. He said he was a selfish person too, that it was only because he thought of nothing but himself that he had gathered all those things. So it was all right, that with anyone else he would have killed them on the spot. But he understood Seogong, and he thanked him for waiting his whole life. Seogong's tears spilled over, a mix of guilt and regret, because they could have had a finer farewell. They truly should have. And at the very instant his tears fell, the world stopped as though it were a lie. The man looked around in shock. Everything had frozen, a butterfly hanging mid-flight like a painting, blades of grass bent in a wind that no longer lifted them. Seogong unmoving with even his honest tears suspended in the air. Then, in the place where time had stopped for everything but the man himself, an old man appeared and said he had passed all the tests, that he was someone who could send the man into the past. How could a human defy the laws of heaven with mere mystical objects? The old man asked, and raised his hand, and the 5 items the man had collected across his whole life reappeared and floated round him. The same materials that had vanished with the technique. In that moment the man understood. This old man was a being far beyond human, The true ingredients of this technique were never these artifacts, the old man said, but the effort poured into gathering them, and with a wave of his hand they dissolved like smoke. The man had passed because he had lived his whole life sacrificing himself for a single purpose, and forgiving Seogong had been the final test, the hardest of all, yet the man had passed it most easily. The man's whole body shook. He had always believed the heavens indifferent, and yet here stood their very incarnation, and his surprise curdled fast to anger as he demanded whether this was a being that answered only after such extreme suffering. "Do not be too angry," the old man said. "People see me more easily than you would think. Some meet me every day, but your wish was not one I could grant easily." The man could not argue, for it had not been about wealth or some beautiful woman. His only wish had been to return to the past, to kill the one who must be killed and save those who should not die, ending Hua Mugi first of all. But there was something just as important, he admitted, that he wanted to live his life properly, that perhaps the real reason he so desperately wanted to go back was not only his rage, but the bottomless regret he carried for a life never led by him, only shoved along by something else, and he asked whether it had been the old man doing the pushing. The old man only smiled awkwardly and asked what life the man wanted after his revenge. "I don't know," the man said. "Whether I become the heavenly demon after my father, live quietly in seclusion, become a womanizer who conquers all the beauties of the world, leave the cult to beat up scoundrels, or turn scoundrel myself, I haven't decided a thing." The old man said he looked forward to that new life, that they should drink together the next time they met, and with those words he disappeared. Next time, the man echoed, and felt the old man might well stand before him again. One day. At the same moment the frozen time began to flow. The butterfly beat its wings into the sky, the grass swayed, and Seogong's tears fell at last to the ground, the old master still apologizing, truly sorry, while the man watched in silence. He would never know that his great regression technique had brushed the will of heaven itself, that the final ruling came from heaven, but his technique was the very thread binding the man to it. The spirit master pleaded with a desperate face that the man must not forget their promise, that he had to stop the marriage. The man chuckled that even now at this age, in the face of death, the old fool made the same request, asking whether it was still hell. A hotter hell, Seogong said, that if the woman would not listen, the man should tear up his betrothal document, to that extent and more. Good then, the man told him, smiling, that as punishment for trying to betray him, Seogong would suffer that hell all over again. The spirit master wailed and begged, and the man only chuckled and walked toward the light, leaving him to it. Watching the radiant glow scatter, Seogong was overcome, and the only words he could find were that he wanted to go too. That he wanted to go too. I opened my eyes. I had opened and closed them countless times across my long life, but never in a moment as desperate as this. Please, let me go back to a time when I could undo all of it, and what spread before me paid back every hardship of all the years before my regression. I stood on a wide martial arts stage broad as a plaza, and beyond the thousands of spectators packing the seats rose colossal statues of demons, the red, blue, and yellow three-colored figures ringing the arena, their giant swords and knives and fists meeting overhead to form a roof, and beyond them, a still more massive statue, arms crossed, gazing down arrogantly upon the world. A black demon carved as the symbol of the heavenly demon divine cult. I've come back. My heart began to slam as if it would burst clean through, and as though to celebrate my return, cheers erupted from every direction, the demonic followers crowding the rim of the arena. Then it struck me what day this was, just as a man stepped onto the stage from the opposite side. Today was the day of the new demon skirmish. Around this time, my father had made his shocking announcement that he would no longer limit the next leader to his own bloodline, and to back it he held a martial competition for the cult's younger generation, offering its winner a chance to challenge one of his two sons, with a single wish granted to whoever won. After 10 days of brutal matches, the champion had been decided, and he had chosen to challenge me. The crowd chanted my name, the very name Seogong had been so desperate to learn. I was the youngest of the heavenly demon's two sons, Geo Mujiak. As they cheered, the skirmish champion knit his brow hard and sneered that by the end of this match the chanted name would be different, that no matter who I was, he wouldn't hold back. At the time I'd been stunned that he chose me over my brother, but there was another reason, and he asked whether I cared to forfeit, already certain of his win. And the truth is, in that first life, I lost this match not for lack of skill, but because of his despicable scheme, for he had bribed my kitchen staff to lace my meal with energy-dispersing poison, a toxin that temporarily kills internal energy. It was no ordinary version, seeming harmless until it scattered my energy under the strain of a real fight, and only later did I learn it was a special strain called Black Queen, developed and quietly spread by the Unorthodox Alliance. After I lost, I reported it to my father, who only gave me a look that scolded me for falling for such a petty trick, and afterward I took one reckless action after another to make up for the defeat, my true enemy never my brother, but my own impatience and small wounded pride. Mistake piled on failure until I stumbled out of the succession entirely. It had all begun with this single defeat. At that fateful hinge, the first words I spoke after returning were to ask the man his name again. Laughter rippled around the stage, and his face hardened. Taking it for mockery, when in truth I simply couldn't recall it. To disrespect him, Gu Pyungho, he snapped, was to insult his master. Oh, right, I said. Gu Pyungho. He was the fifth of the 7 disciples of the Blood Heaven Blade Demon Gu Chionpa, one of the 8 demon supremes, and I was certain he'd used every cowardly trick there was to win, since he was hardly the most gifted blade among the 7. I told him to get his words straight, that I disrespected him, not his master, and laughter broke out among the followers of the One/Sword Sovereign, who never got along with the Blood Heaven Blade Demon. He spat that I must be confident to provoke him so, but I ignored him and looked instead at the heavenly demon far above in the upper seat, whose presence stood out unmistakable even among thousands. Flustered, Gu Pyungho turned his bewilderment to anger and warned that even without his inner strength I'd best be careful. His blade had no eyes. I ignored him and took stock of my own body instead, the strange unfamiliarity of being young again filling me, the sword in my hand feeling like a toy. Will this body obey me? I wondered. He drew his dao with great flourish, but I untied my sword and laid it on the ground, since using a blade would give away my true skill, and a cheer went up, because it's only in a demon's nature to cheer when an opponent is being thoroughly mocked. That lit his fury, and he howled that he wouldn't kill me, being the cult leader's blood, but he'd take one of my arms, closing the distance in a bound and driving his saber at my shoulder. I watched the falling blade to the last instant, then twisted aside. Good, very good. All my worry over whether this body would answer me was wasted, because it reacted at once, faster and fiercer than I had any right to expect, as if reminding me I'd forgotten this was me in my youth, when I felt I could run all day and crush stone with my fists. A smile came on its own, and I was so happy I wanted to shout. Seeing me grin only enraged him further, and he snarled that the crazy bastard was actually laughing. His eyes rolled wide as he swung openly for my vital points, and since he could channel inner strength into blade energy, I stopped dragging it out. Dodging the saber that kept reaching for my arm, I rushed his chest, and while he gasped and tried to guard, my elbow was already buried in his solar plexus. I rode the recoil and followed, fists hammering, the first quick blow caving his nose, the heavy second cracking his ribs, and even without inner strength we were martial artists trained from childhood, men who could fell a bull with bare hands, so his body had no chance. I didn't stop. As he screamed and crumpled, I seized his wrist and asked which hand he'd used to deliver the poison. This one, then leapt and slammed my foot down, using my knee as a lever to drive the force from my soles up through my whole frame and snap the limb, the shock surging through him and shattering wrist, elbow, and shoulder at once. The scream that followed was unnecessary, because anyone could see the arm he built his techniques on was ruined past repair, that he would never fight again. Cheers crashed in from all sides. It had been no clumsy bout but a clean, decisive victory that entertained the whole crowd. And though the Blood Heaven Blade Demon's followers jeered, their voices drowned under the roar, while the Blood Heaven Blade Demon himself, seated among them, showed nothing and only watched. As the heat died down, my father finally rose, the red dragon embroidered on his spotless white robe looking ready to leap to the heavens, and the 8 demon supremes beside him stood as one, and like a wave rolling across the hall, every demonic follower rose and bowed to the absolute ruler, Heavenly Demon Jium Wujin, the strongest of this era, for now. My father looked at me, his gaze so intense it felt as if it might bore straight through my body. In those days, I had been terrified of that piercing look that seemed to belittle whoever it landed on, and my whole picture of him had been built from guesses and rumor. I wished I could tell my younger self not to invent people in your own head, that the answers are not inside you but in the person standing right in front of you. This time, I did not look away. He was only a man straining not to lose his authority while managing 1,000 schemes aimed at his seat. The coldness, the cost of that effort, a thing I could see now that I'd been blind to before. He asked what my wish was, his deep voice carrying the power to intimidate even without internal energy laced through it, and everyone leaned in, especially the 8 demon supremes. Because I'd never expected to return to this exact day, I followed my gut and said I wanted to go hunting with him, just the 2 of us, that I'd heard he loved hunting in his youth, and wanted to learn it from him. He flinched, plainly caught off guard, and a murmur ran through the watchers, who'd surely expected me to ask to be named heir or demand a treasured sword. He stared in silence a moment, then said gruffly that they'd leave at dawn, and began to walk away. In that black and white scene, the lone red heavenly demon moved, and every martial artist bowed his head, and among the thousands not a sound could be heard. As they departed, a venomous voice broke the hush, calling me an idiot for wishing for such a thing. I turned to see Gu Pyungho carried off by his senior disciples, arms hanging limp, and I threw up my hands and said I was sorry. What was his name again? Ignored to the very end, he screamed for his senior brother to kill me, but with the match over no one dared, and they only glared and bore him away. Now that I'm back, your lives won't be nearly as fun as they used to be. I was grateful to the heavens for sending me back to this exact hinge of my life, and even though he had tried to betray me at the very end, I was thankful to Gui Ryongja for completing the great regression technique. I looked up into the bright blue sky and smiled, as young as I felt. Back in my quarters, I stood before a bronze mirror, the reflection of my younger self vivid and brimming with life, and I felt I could spend the whole day just staring at it. My thoughts turned to Hua Muki. If I could find and kill him before he came into his power, it would be simple. but finding him never was, for he had dropped into the martial world as if from the sky and secluded himself after reaching the tri-peak, so nothing was known of him, and combing the central plains for him could provoke him in ways no one could predict. In the end, the only real answer was for me to become stronger than him, and luckily the heavens had granted me time to prepare. The energy-dispersing poison had vanished as though it never touched me, and since no trace lingered after the duel, Gu Pyungho must have used the proper version that left no evidence, because having dared to poison the heavenly demon's bloodline, any proof would have been disastrous for him. Lost in this, I called the name of the person I owed more than anyone in my life, Leon. A cheerful voice answered, and a young woman entered, so large her martial clothes seemed ready to split, the word overweight not quite catching it, obese nearer the mark. She was Leon, my personal guard, and back then I had not known her size came from her martial arts, or rather from me. The all-body petrification technique, a secret art that turned her body briefly to stone, passed to her alone, the massive bulk of her frame its fatal side effect. I looked at her in the mirror and asked how I looked, and she answered cheerfully that I was the handsomest man in the whole martial world. Her voice so pleasant I was sure she'd win any contest for the finest voice in the Central Plains. That's boring, I told her, and she said the question always had a fixed answer coming from the man who paid her wage. Your voice isn't even the best thing about you, I thought. You've got such a bright heart too. She caught my eyes in the mirror and asked why I was looking at her like that. That day in my first life, I lived because of Leon. She threw herself into the path of Hua Mugi's sword energy. The blow meant to kill me, and his energy punched clean through her whole body petrification, but in doing so was nudged slightly offline, just enough to miss my heart. Hua Mugi never checked whether I was dead, never imagining the strike had missed, and so her sacrifice and his arrogance together saved my life. She had been ready to die for me, and back then I treated her as nothing more than a guard, taking her presence for granted the way we forget the air. I told her she'd done well in the duel today, and walked across the room to her, remembering the child she'd been, gentle eyes, a doll's face that turned lovely when she smiled, the girl everyone said would grow into the most beautiful woman in the world. Then one day that lovely girl had simply appeared chubby, and I never knew how much she'd wept over gaining too much weight for me to look at. That child had told me back then, with the same eyes she wore today, that she would protect me. Her only crime was being born in the divine cult and raised a guard warrior, and the price she paid was far too high. She gave up the face that would have made her the most beautiful woman alive, and yet she kept her promise, threw her great body in front of the sword energy, and because of her, I lived. Saving Leon alone makes this whole return worth it, and I made her a silent promise of my own, that I would rid her of the side effects of the petrification technique once and for all. Then I told her, out of nowhere, that we shouldn't grow close, and when she asked why, I said building affection with a guard is just stacking up reasons for her to die in my place. A sneaky thing to do. She said that was nonsense, that of course it was natural to protect her young master. There's no such thing as a natural sacrifice, I told her. It should always be yourself first, then your family, and only then the person you guard. She didn't hesitate, saying that wasn't possible, because for her I came first, second was still me, and besides she had no family. I couldn't begin to measure the depth of her loyalty. She said I was acting strange today, and I told her if she wanted to see something stranger she should come along. And as I strode out I said we were going to flip the dinner table over. I went straight to the kitchen and gathered everyone, the head chef Lim included, and from the line called out the assistant cook who'd worked here 3 years. I asked why he'd put energy-dispersing poison in my food, and the whole kitchen recoiled while he cried it wasn't him. One mercy of regression is that I didn't need to peer into anyone's heart, because I already knew. He was buried in gambling debt, having burned through his parents' money and his friends, and had the gall to poison the food of the heavenly demon divine cult's bloodline for a price. I told him he'd taken the 3,000 yang and gone straight back to the tables, hadn't he? And he flinched, dropped to his knees, and begged to be spared. I asked whether Gu Pyungho had come to him in person with the money, and the instant he said yes, I took his head in one clean stroke. It was my first kill since regression, and I felt nothing. Killing him without pain was the last kindness I had to give, for even in my first life he'd died this very day, stabbed in a gambling den by an assassin Gu Pyungho sent to silence him. Poison in food can never be forgiven, since one act of forgiveness only invites the next attempt. Chef Lim, his face stricken, knelt and said everything was his responsibility, that anything happening in his kitchen was his to answer for. I helped him up and asked, by his full name, Lim Suk So, whether some injustice in our cult made it my father's fault. He said no, absolutely not. Then why does Lim Sukso take it on himself? I asked, and told him to stop the useless talk and make chicken noodle soup for dinner, that I'd been craving it, wondering how many decades it had been since I last tasted it. He pointed out I'd eaten it just 2 days before, and I told him there was still a sword in my hand dripping blood, and he said he'd make it delicious and serve it at once. As I left, Leon said urgently that it was her fault as head of security, and I asked whether they were all suffering some responsibility sickness, then told her to spread word through the cult that Gu Pyungho had arranged it and I'd beheaded the cook who poisoned my food. The blood heaven blade demon's side will deny it, she warned, and I told her to let them, that too many eyes and ears here had seen and heard, and that they ought to wear the filthy name, so spread it wide until even the dogs of the cult were barking energy-dispersing poison. Following me, she ventured carefully that I really did seem different today, the first to notice since she served closest, adding that I was even making jokes now. I decided to live a different life starting today, I told her, suddenly, because I don't believe people change a little each day, they change all at once when there's a trigger, and because that's hard and rare, people say others never change. Without giving her the chance to ask what my trigger had been, I moved on. Later, she stood astonished at the gear I'd laid out for the hunting trip, asking whether we really needed all of it, and I told her we did, that there isn't a soul in our cult who has camped as much as I have, though I only said aloud that since I was going with my father I needed to be well prepared. She wished me a wonderful time, and I asked whether that would really happen, because I was confident in many things but my relationship with my father was not one, and having now lived longer than my father's present age, I was less confident still. You have to make it happen, she told me, and it will. I did not sleep well. I dreamed I was still hunting the materials for the great regression technique, never where they should be, and I wandered everywhere after them, until Leon's voice asked whether I was all right. I must have screamed in my sleep. It was a disgusting dream, I told her, and when she asked what about, I told her to imagine starting all over again as the lowest-ranked martial artist there was, and she begged me to just kill her instead. I sat up and looked at the mirror against the wall, and as if to remind me a dream is only a dream, my younger self looked back, and the sight lifted my spirits at once. You seem tense, she said. I told her I was about to spend the day with someone scarier than a tiger. In my past life, whenever things grew unbearable, I used to imagine what I'd do if I could only go back, and the thought alone lifted me enough to endure. But in all those imaginings, never once had I pictured hunting with my father on the second day of my return. Whether my instinct had chosen right, I'd know the moment the hunt was over. With everything packed, I slung the heavy sack over my shoulder and walked toward the Heavenly Demon Pavilion, where my father waited. There was no need to travel far for the hunting ground. The mountains behind the cult were famous for their ruggedness, riddled with defensive formations and mechanisms, a place no one could enter, and in that desolate stretch only my father and I were present. 3 of us, I corrected myself, since Hui, my father's bodyguard, would be following hidden somewhere. I called him Uncle Hui, the one bodyguard my father trusted without reservation, the way I had Leon. I raised my chi and swept the surroundings, but couldn't catch a trace of him. His stealth genuinely top tier. Of course, Hui too had died to Huamugi on that day. The first thing my father said was to ask what all that cumbersome baggage was, since I carried a pack nearly as large as my body. These are things I might need over the next few days, I said. A few days, he said. We're staying. 1. Well, you never know, I told him. You might find hunting with me so enjoyable you'll want to stay a few more, and his face made no secret of how absurd he found it as he told me to dream on. Not half an hour into his company I realized my memories of him were badly distorted, that I'd remembered a man of few words who in truth spoke more than I'd thought. You were quite impressive, he said, of my match against Gu Pyongho, and since the skill from my life before regression had shown through even without internal power, I saw no reason to lie and said I'd been hiding my true skills. It looked that way, he agreed. Taking the mood for what it was, I joked that I was no hissing cat but a beast keeping its claws sheathed, and he stopped and looked back, asking, if I was a beast, why hide my claws? Ah, I said, I hadn't thought of it that way. So you're a cat, he said. Just as he turned away, he suddenly asked what level I'd reached in the soaring sword art, a martial art passed only to the heavenly demon's bloodline, an extremely advanced technique on a level with the demon supreme's arts, though it couldn't stand beside the 9 calamities demon art passed only to the heavenly demon himself. Judging I couldn't deceive him, I answered honestly that I had mastered it. At that, a gust of wind shot from the tip of his finger and grazed my cheek, and had I not instinctively turned my face, it would have left a hole in it. He asked, surprised, whether I really had mastered it, and I rubbed my stinging cheek and shouted that he'd loosed a wind attack even while doubting me. What if I hadn't dodged? That would have been the price for lying, he said. A scar on this handsome face, which looks just like yours, wouldn't suit me, I told him, and he snorted and walked on. The old me would have been terrified. What kind of father loosed a wind blade at his own child without a pause, and at the face? Without looking back, he said that mastering it at my age was impressive, and since in my past life I'd only reached mastery in my 30s, his surprise was natural, and his praise sincere. Thank you, I said. After that, we climbed in silence a long while, the kind that on a mountain felt almost like an unspoken conversation. I finally broke it, asking who taught him to hunt, and after a pause he said his older brother had. Do I have an uncle? I asked. He died, he said, when he was about your age. I killed him. Instead of mouthing some polite condolence, I told him my honest thought, that he'd done well, and he stopped to look at me sharply. Otherwise I wouldn't have been born, I said, and after staring coldly a moment, he walked on. How could a father not carry wounds from such family strife? The stronger a man looks outside, the deeper his scars run beneath. And my past life had taught me to bury the corpses but never the wounds of the heart, so I said it plainly. That was why I could hear what he said next. That back then he simply couldn't find a way through the succession that didn't run over his own brother's body. My answer was firm, that he should not expect the same of me, that what he couldn't do, I couldn't either. And a man can only say that if he has a brother worth the trouble, and you know exactly how vile and cruel mine is. You're good at slandering him behind his back, he said. He deserves it, I answered. And in truth, this much wasn't enough, considering what my brother would do to become the heir. He's struggling on the frontier while you sit comfortable and safe, my father said. My brother was active under our father's orders just then, hadn't yet shown his true colors, and being genuinely capable had my father's trust more than I did, with many angling to align with him. He will never give up the succession, I said, and thinking I can take it while keeping him alive is the arrogance of a fool. My father's expression seemed to ask whether I'd always been like this, and my determined eyes answered yes. In my past life I never married, so I didn't truly know what feelings a child stirs in a man, which was exactly why I was curious what sort of existence I was to my father. How long had we climbed when he signaled me quiet and pointed far ahead, asking whether I saw it? I made out only dense forest. I can, he said. What's there, I asked. Dinner, he said. And when I reached for the bow on my shoulder, he checked my impatience, asking how I meant to catch a thing I couldn't even see, and told me first to close my eyes and sense the surroundings. Experts read an opponent by sensing the vibrations in the air, and the only key I could sense was my father's. Calm, and that calm was the frightening part, because beneath the serene sea lay a storm capable of overturning the world. Now release a single thread of chi, he said slowly, without breaking it. Imagine your body as a spool, and let the thread out slow. In my previous life, I'd never spun chi as fine as a thread, since there had always been a clear reason to release it, to crush an opponent's momentum. But now I was doing it in a way I'd never imagined. Finer, he ordered. It must not break. And I discovered for the first time how far my chi could reach. More, he urged. And without his encouragement, I'd never have stretched it so far. Then, in the next moment, my chi brushed against something. Did it reach? He asked, sensing it as fast as I had. It seems to be a tree, I said, and astonishingly I could tell what it was without being able to explain how. Now explore around it, slowly, he said. I held my focus and stretched further and caught a living chi beneath the tree. Could it be a wild boar? I asked, and when he didn't answer, I cracked my eyes to find him staring, surprised, and added that the fur felt stiff and the body long. It's a boar, he said. Still, I couldn't see it with my eyes, yet I had identified it in the distant forest, and even my father, having done it himself, seemed to find it hard to believe I could hit it in one shot from so far. The technique I'd just used was no mere hunting trick, but an extraordinary secret art with real application in combat. You were planning to laugh at me when I failed, I said. Of course, he said. You were supposed to fail. I'm your son, I told him. I couldn't hit it in one shot my first time either, he said. But I have the heavenly martial body, I said. And at the mention his gaze shifted slightly. Back then I'd carried a bitter resentment over the heavenly martial body, a complaint that a man who chased strength so fiercely had neglected me, the one who held it, and I'd even wondered whether he was jealous. Yes, back then I was that petty. But now I understand. It isn't about being given special treatment for holding a heavenly martial body. It's about wielding it well enough to become a special person myself. And only when everyone's expectations gather on that specialness does it become a blessing from heaven. What are you doing? He asked, planning to skip dinner. I loosed the arrow hard toward where I sensed the chi, and in the dark a campfire soon blazed with well-dressed boar meat cooking over it. When did you learn to butcher an animal? He asked. From books, I said, and he said for someone who learned from books I was quite skilled. Father, I butchered and eaten hundreds of boars. I steered the subject elsewhere, telling him the thing he sat on had been prepared as a gift, well worth hauling along, for he was sitting on the tiger pelt I'd brought. And his lips curled faintly. It's hard to imagine anyone looking so fitting while smirking, but my father managed the impossible. Did you want to hunt with me to impress me and become the successor? He asked. No, I said. I know well such things don't work on you, but I can become the successor without your help anyway. Confident, aren't you? He said. Of course, I said. My greedy, cruel, ill-tempered brother will be doing everything to obstruct me. There you go slandering him again. He said and asked why I'd wanted to hunt with him. 2 reasons, I said. The first to learn something and grow stronger, and I think I've managed that. And growing stronger means what? He asked, his gaze probing for whether I aimed at his seat. The reason isn't to become the heavenly demon, I said quickly, only to become the successor and learn the martial arts of the heavenly demon. From his vantage, both my brother and I surely looked far too young to be heir, and in truth it was only about 10 years later that he named my brother. I couldn't afford to wait 10 years. It was time to take the all out of the bag and start poking holes everywhere, to learn the 9 calamities demon art quickly and reach greatness. No higher, because even my father, who had achieved 10-star greatness, had fallen to Hua Mugi. So I needed 12-star greatness. Sometimes I imagine, I told him, that I meet someone I truly want to kill but can't, because I'm not strong enough, and I want to never feel that frustration. His face gave nothing away. And the second reason, he asked, I wanted to spend time alone with you. I said, it's a first, isn't it? The sneer deepened. Such cheap sentiment, he said. Perfect for dying. How could anything be cheap with the greatest in the world? I said. If I sing, it's the greatest song in the world, and if I drink, the greatest liquor. Enough, he said. Yes, I said. I'll keep my mouth shut for 1 whole hour. I met his gaze and smiled, probably the first time I'd ever smiled in front of him, though he turned his head away coldly. When I thought of my father, I had no memories worth treasuring, because frightening memories don't turn nostalgic. In this life, I won't let them stay so desolate. But don't be pleased about it. It's not for your sake, it's for mine. I woke early, packed my belongings, and told my father we should head back. Where do you think you're going? He said. You came out to hunt with the heavenly demon, so we should at least catch a tiger before we leave. It wasn't really about the tiger. It meant he hadn't found the time with me unpleasant. That's a relief, I said, and when he asked what was, I told him I'd made preparations for the second day too. He told me to stop talking nonsense and lead the way. We went deeper into the forest. After a long while, he told me to close my eyes again, said the target was 100 jang to the right, farther than last time, and to feel the wind. Then channel your energy into the wind, he told me. And once again, it was something I'd never heard in my whole life. No master, no manual ever having mentioned it, and the thrill of learning something new surged through me. First emit your energy, he said, and cautiously, the way I'd searched for the boar, I let it out. If you're this slow, it's just a petty trick, he said. To use it in real combat, you must extend your energy to the end as fast as you can. But channeling energy into the wind wasn't easy. I could feel both the wind and my energy, yet how was I to fuse two separate things, especially since the wind he meant wasn't the gusting kind but the flow of air around us. So I had to find the currents running directly before me and pour my energy into them. I fumbled at it a long time, and my father said nothing, only standing with his hands behind his back, gazing at the distant mountains. Why do people see a whole life in a man's back? From my father's, I should have felt the strength of an absolute being, yet what I felt was loneliness and desolation. Not bad, he said. In that moment, the energy I'd been emitting suddenly cut off 100 jang to the right. When did it reach so far? Staring blankly at his back, I'd channeled it into the wind without realizing. And since I'd gained considerable insight from my previous life, what seemed difficult had come effortlessly. I did it without realizing, I said, and he stared at me somewhat agitated, since whether luck or accident, it shouldn't happen so easily. It doesn't matter, he said. That bastard has run far off anyway. As the sun began to make dusk, we came upon the one we'd missed. That's the bastard from before, he said. I had no idea, but it must have been since he said so, for I still couldn't see him, and it amazed me how he could fix the size and aura of a thing at such a distance. He's 150 jang away, he said. Use the wind to find him. I tried again, and since I'd succeeded thoughtlessly before, it wasn't too hard at my level. Ultimately a matter of the mind. I tried this way and that, and then realized that the problem was I'd only been trying to place my energy onto the wind, the very act of trying to set it there. So instead I sent my energy along with the wind, the way you walk beside a friend, mingling with it, and flying as separate energies mine and the winds began to intertwine like two dragons coiling around each other. This is it. I understood that carrying energy in the wind was not like a man riding a horse, but like intertwining with it, and my energy, carried along, swiftly reached 150 jang. The instant I confirmed what it was, a loud tiger's roar erupted from afar, and I flinched, and the energy I'd sent out cut off. It really was a tiger, I said. I was surprised by the tiger, and my father by me, since he surely hadn't expected me to master his teaching so fast. Father, this is just the beginning, I thought. I too would love to stroll the lakeside with you, but we must ride the current, ride the rapids and plunge down the waterfall, because the enemy we must face might at this very moment be braving a typhoon alone in the middle of a distant sea. Father, send me to that sea. Do not neglect your training in sending out energy, he said. The more you increase the count, the longer your life will be. I'll keep it in mind, I said. I will produce more than you, Father. I must. This time, he said, close your eyes and feel my energy. I sent mine out, and just as it had found the tiger, I felt his, slowly, very slowly, examining the energy spread around him. One strand at a time, and my mouth slowly opened. Father, what is this? I asked. He stood in the middle of a spider's web, dozens of threads extending in every direction, stretched so far I couldn't begin to explore them. If anyone tried to approach him in secret, they'd have to avoid that web which the sheer length and complexity made impossible. That Hua Mugi defeated my father who had reached this level. How? Though I didn't want to, I couldn't help being amazed by him again. That night I told my father I had a trump card, and from my pouch took out his favorite liquor, filled a clean glass and offered it. Good, he said, and I told him it was too strong for me. In truth, I liked alcohol and could hold it well, having made a habit of drinking whenever I struggled to find the technique's materials. But I had no intention of bragging, so I called it strong. Drink all night and he'd collapse first. No warrior complains about strong liquor, he said. Better a poison in the heart than in the drink, I said. Poison in the heart, he asked with a sneer. Could you kill me to save yourself? After a pause, I told him no. How could a child kill their parent? Honestly, that was a lie too. With sufficient reason I could kill my father, since today was the first time we'd had a proper conversation. So how could he be more precious than my life? Then I asked whether he could kill me. If that becomes a question to ponder, he said, you should never speak of poison in the heart. I felt it in his eyes. He could kill me without a moment's hesitation. Then I should learn to handle the drink, I said, and after drinking he watched me grimace at its strength with a strange look. That night I sat alone practicing the chi projection he'd taught me. This is fun. I could now send my chi riding the wind quite far, my energy roaming the pitch black dark. This is a tree, there's a rock below it, even the movement of small insects, and the more I trained the faster the chi moved, until it suddenly stopped, having passed through something unfamiliar. What is that? I pulled it back and sent it through again, but the strange energy was gone, and staring at the spot I could sense nothing. There was definitely something there. Then I noticed my father lying down, watching me. Why were you staring over there? He asked. I felt something. I said, I'm not sure what. He looked at me with startled eyes, then turned to face the other way and said, let's sleep. I lay down with the campfire between us. Then it struck me. Hui. It was Uncle Hui, my father's bodyguard in stealth, and when I tried to feel it again he must have moved away. And understanding it sent a thrill through me, since 2 days ago I'd never have detected him at all. Of course, Hui wasn't trying his hardest to hide, but just recognizing his basic stealth was a significant gain. If I kept training until I could emit dozens of strands at once like my father, any stealth would become useless. No need to search, simply detecting everything. Here, there, everywhere. Maybe from drinking clumsily, I couldn't fall asleep that night. When I was tired from searching for the technique's materials, I used to drink and gaze at the stars, and those same stars that had shared my loneliness shone unchanged today. My father seemed unable to sleep either, perhaps stirred by how fast I'd absorbed his teaching, like paper drinking water. Among the demon supremes, whom do you trust most, father? I asked. I didn't expect an answer, but he replied, asking why I wanted to know. The day our family was annihilated, Hua Muki ravaged the heavenly demon pavilion, a place guarded like a fortress by 3 formations of K-men, 6 mechanical formations, and chosen warriors. The 8 demon supremes and their followers surrounded it in 8 directions to protect the heavenly demon, the northern heaven sword family under the 1/sword supreme to the north, the southern heavens blade family under the blood heaven blade demon to the south, the Eastern Fist faction under the Unbeatable Fist Demon to the east, the Western Illusion formation under the Soul Reaper Demon to the west, the Faceless Swordsman of the Evil Smiling Demon to the northeast, the Drunkards of the Great Drunken Demon to the southeast, the Poison Fangs of the Poison King to the southwest, and the Mad Monks of the Demonic Buddha to the northwest. At the time I thought the enemy had broken in from outside, but later I learned the exterior had never been breached, that someone among the 8 demon supremes had brought Hua Mugi into the inner sanctum where the pavilion stood. The traitor could have been one or more, and though it was never revealed who, it didn't matter, because I considered all 8 traitors. After my father's death, their choice was to seal off the gates rather than seek revenge, not one stepping forward. And had even one taken a stand, I wouldn't feel this betrayal. Yes, I understand. Seeing Huamugi standing over the heavenly demon's corpse with that overwhelming prowess, none of you dared. So you should understand too, if I use all of you to my heart's content in the future, treating you as disposable tools, you should understand. Wouldn't that be fair? If I become the heavenly demon, I said aloud, I will take control of the 8 demon supremes and tighten their leashes. What, he said, and sprang up, the force making the grass stand in unison, and I quickly rose too. Why? He asked. Because they are much farther away than you think, father. You may know exactly where a tiger hides 100 jang off, but you don't know how distant the hearts of those laughing right in front of you truly are. Because I couldn't say that outright, I gave another reason, that there was severe corruption tied to them, not only those involved, but those riding their coattails. He listened in silence, so I went on, that of course we needed to acknowledge their authority to run the cult smoothly, but they had crossed the line. Isn't it time to properly establish discipline? He said nothing in reply, but from his demeanor I could guess his true feelings. He shared my view. He clearly had complaints about the 8 demon supremes, or he'd have scolded me harshly for the insolence of suggesting we discipline them. Greedy ambitions will only get your legs torn apart and your stomach burst open, he said. With a future as long as mine, I told him. That can't happen. I'll walk slowly and eat sparingly. He didn't call it nonsense or blasphemy, but ambition, and I guess his unsheathed blade was aligned with mine. Don't worry, father. I know them better than anyone. I spent a long time returning to the cult for the final ingredient, the heavenly demon spirit, and since that lay in the distant future, I knew everything about the 8 demon supremes, what lives they led, and how they ended. I will set them straight. And so the night passed, with thoughts as numerous as the stars. After returning from the hunt, I went to the training ground to drill the secret techniques my father had taught me, channeling energy into the wind and emitting multiple strands at once. Eating a proper meal felt like wasted time, so I made do with jerky and substituted sleep with chi circulation and breathing. And the more I practiced, the more I grasped how crucial these techniques were. Detecting an ambush meant having an extra life. I've learned from countless experiences that if I didn't walk today, I'd have to run tomorrow. After several days of intense practice, I emerged able to channel energy into the wind freely, with the count up to 3 or 4 strands. Leon was waiting at the entrance, telling me to rest and eat, and when I asked why she wasn't attending her tasks, she said her duty was to protect me. She guarded the entrance the entire time. I realized some shock therapy was needed to change this stubborn girl's mind. If someone ambushed me, I asked, what would she do? And she said throw herself in front of the blow. If you died taking a blade meant for me, I said, how do you think I'll feel? Should I dance in the middle of the training ground? She supposed I wouldn't, but said it beat my dying. And besides, I was no great dancer. That's a selfish sacrifice, I told her, only considering your own feelings. I didn't want to call her noble spirit selfish, but the therapy was necessary even if it didn't always work. Leon, I asked, do you really want to protect me? Yes, she said. Then start training in martial arts, I told her. And when the time comes you truly need to protect me, don't just block the attack, kill the enemy. If she grew stronger, that strength would pave the way to her happiness. She nodded silently. No joke this time. Just then someone shouted from afar, calling out, hey Fatso, and I looked back to see 3 of the Blood Heaven Blade Demon's disciples walking toward us, asking whether that noble young master still wasn't out. By the looks of it, they'd come by several times while I trained. Fatso, were those bastards out of their minds? They couldn't see me hidden behind Leon's large frame. How many times have you dealt with this? I asked her. I'm fine, she said. It's nothing. If this is nothing, I said, then what counts as something? Do we need our family massacred by an enemy for it to be a big deal? Young master, she said, I'm really fine. She was worried I might cause an incident, worried about the trouble whether I got hurt or they did. Leon, don't worry too much, I told her. I'm not going to go crazy and ruin my life over this. Most people take care of themselves just fine. They drew near, and she said quickly that they didn't seem to be here with good intentions, that it might be best to avoid them. Of course I should avoid them, I said. Avoid hornets, avoid dog filth, avoid father's wrath. But not these guys. By then the 3 stood before me. Oh, said the one who'd taunted Leon. The noble young master is here as well. It was Yang Po, the second disciple of the Blood Heaven Blade Demon. Trash in a different way from Gu Pyungho, who used the poison, infamous for looking down on people and bullying them psychologically. I glanced at the handsome one with him, probably the youngest, known as the kindest of the disciples, who in my first life eventually took his own life under Yang Po's relentless bullying. Even now his expression wasn't bright, surely dragged here against his will. The other was the 4th disciple, whose name I couldn't recall, who'd left no good impression either. Ignoring my guard is the same as ignoring me, I told Yang Po. Sorry, he said. I didn't see the young master with her in the way. You need to be a bit bigger. The ignorant fool couldn't even grasp the conversation. That he could behave like this was entirely my father's fault. Ever since the announcement that anyone in the cult could become the successor, the special status of being the heavenly demon's son had diminished, and they were trying to use the chance to earn the title of one not inferior to the son of the heavenly demon. You said they visited several times, I said to Leon. Senior brother Gu can no longer practice martial arts, she said. So what? I said. Should I nurse him? Leon, go get a rag, let's wipe his sweat. You, said Yang Po. Do I look like I'm joking? We're not in a relationship where we have serious conversations, I told him. His demeanor turned fierce, thinking himself ignored, and it was laughable to watch a man who tormented others to the brink of death sulk over a few words of mockery. If you crippled someone, he said, you should take responsibility. Apologize officially. I could guess why he sought an apology. The Blood Heaven Blade Demon hadn't chosen a primary disciple, so his disciples scrambled to win his favor any way they could, and Yang Po aimed to earn credit by extracting an official apology from me, saving the Blood Heaven Blade Demon's face. Do you really think your master will make you primary disciple this way? I asked. I came to clear my senior brother's injustice. He said that though his attack was excessive, I'd intentionally crushed his arm. He thought it a valid point, but it was a futile effort within the Buddha's palm. So my father and the 8 demon supremes are at fault, I said, since father acknowledged my victory and asked my wish, while your master never protested, which means the leader and your master couldn't tell right from wrong as you can't. His face went pale and he stammered that it wasn't true, that I should stop spouting nonsense. How could he overpower me with words? He looked back at his senior brothers, just as flustered, since a wrong move could see them accused of criticizing the heavenly demon, and Yang Po reluctantly backed down, saying he'd leave it for today, but the matter wasn't over. Wait, I said, you need to apologize before you go, for speaking rudely to my subordinate. Only then did their gaze shift to Leon, who from the start hadn't concerned them. She wished it would end here, saying she was fine, but I told her I wasn't. For daring to run your mouth at my subordinate, I said kneel and apologize, even if it isn't sincere. Let the rumor spread that you knelt. Are you telling me to kneel to that pig woman? He said incredulous, that he'd rather die than kneel. I got the answer I wanted at once. You'd rather die, I said. That's manly, all right. I'll grant your wish. And I drew my sword. If you leave like this, I told him, word gets back to the cult that the second disciple of the Blood Heaven Blade Demon got scared and ran from me, and you'll carry the label of coward for life. He'd come to earn his master's favor, only to end up marked a coward. Kneel and apologize, I said. Or fight me, your choice. Why are you going this far, he asked. You can come find me, I said. Tell me to apologize to your fellow disciple. Gather your group and threaten revenge. I understand all that. But why bully my subordinate? Why bring up her weight? Did you ever once buy her a meal? Rather than reflect, he looked more irritated. So you really mean to kill me for that fatty, he said. Correct, I said. His eyes narrowed fiercely as he moved just as I expected, snarling, how dare you? My subordinate is worth 100 times more than you, I said. No, 1,000. And before I could say 10,000, Yang Po drew his blade. Senior brother, you mustn't, the fourth disciple cried. But Yang Po was already too far gone, saying he couldn't kill the cult leader's child but would cut off my arm to avenge his senior brother. He was confident he could beat me. I didn't remember exactly, but my skills around this time were apparently similar to the Blood Heaven Blade Demon's disciples, all because of my brother, who since childhood had tormented and restrained me, the holder of the heavenly martial body, so much that I couldn't properly develop. What a shame you don't have any energy dispersing poison, I said. Don't be ridiculous, he said. I'm different from senior brother Gu. He launched an initial attack that pushed me back. In my past life, I'd learned many times that a martial artist's character and skill often don't match, and Yang Po was no exception, displaying excellent saber work despite his trashy nature, skilled enough to fairly match the me of back then. Of course, to the current me, he was just another one-second foe like Gu Pyongho, but to avoid revealing my true power, I matched his level and fought evenly. Each time he pressed, his fellow disciples cheered in amazement, while Li An let out a sharp scream, and if it hadn't been an agreed duel, she'd have intervened several times. After about 20 exchanges, I decided to move. Until now, I'd matched his movements, but now it was time to show the essence of the soaring sword art. Like a willow leaf swaying in a gentle breeze, my sword moved light, and blood splattered like rain, the blade piercing through his mouth and emerging from the back of his head. In the frozen silence, only the sound of blood dripping from my sword's tip could be heard, and I looked into his dying eyes and told him he was dying because of that mouth, the mouth that insulted my subordinate and refused to apologize. That mouth killed your kind senior brother and would have killed many more. This is your end. When I withdrew the sword, Yang Po spat blood and collapsed forward, his Tao clattering uselessly. Senior brother, his fellows cried, rushing to him, but he was already a cold corpse, and they stood in shock, never having expected me to actually kill him, while Li An looked even more shocked, staring at me. The fourth one demanded why I'd killed senior brother. How cruel. What did you expect? I said. Can you handle the aftermath? He asked. Your mouth resembles the senior brother's too, I told him coldly, and as if remembering the senior brother died because of his mouth. He clamped shut like a clam. Convey it exactly as it is, I said. If you add a single word that wasn't said, I'll visit you at night. They carried Yang Po's body off, and at that moment I saw the youngest one's expression of relief. How desperate must he have been that, despite someone close to him dying, he couldn't hide his joy. Originally Yang Po would have tormented and killed him, but now he lived. Lim Sukso, who mixed the poison, died as he was supposed to, but the youngest disciple, originally meant to die, now lived. Fate remains as it is, and yet changes too. Dear youngest disciple, endure well and become the best disciple of the Blade Demon someday. Meanwhile, Li An looked at me as if she'd lost everything, asking, didn't I say everyone takes care of themselves? Relax your face, I said. It's not because of you. But it is, isn't it, she said. Then why did you cause such a big incident? What big incident? I said. I just killed someone who deserved to die. The elder of the Blood Heaven Blade Demon won't let this slide, she warned. He will, I said. It won't benefit him to get involved. The root of this is his disciple insulting the young master's guard, dying because he refused to apologize for something a simple apology could have ended. So what would the elder gain from involving himself? He'd only be blamed for raising his disciple badly. But his pride might be hurt, she said. The elder of the Blood Heaven Blade Demon doesn't have that kind of pride, I said. Your handsome young master knows everything. She relaxed a little at my ease. On the contrary, killing Yang Po benefits me, I told her. Everyone will pay attention, and if there's a score for becoming successor, I've added a point. I'd shattered Gu Pyongho in the match and now killed Yang Po, so all eyes in the cult would be on me. I'd left a strong impression on father during the hunt and needed to keep the momentum. Li An, insulting you is insulting me, so in situations like that, don't say it's okay. It was short-sighted of me, she said. We have far more important worries ahead, I told her. Would the owner of the trash get angry because I cleaned it up? Such trivial worries end today. Passion flickered in her eyes. You're serious, she said. You've really changed. It's also why you must change, I said, since the changes I'd undergone these past days were enough to provoke changes in her too. She nodded and said she'd grow stronger. It won't be as easy as it sounds. She'll struggle and reflect and be troubled countless times, because changing a person's life is never easy, and even my own seemingly easy transformation was only possible because of my whole past life. And young master, she said, thank you for today. I was so happy when you took my side. You should be grateful, I told her. Never forget what happened today. She smiled, not just a smile but a wide grin that buried her eyes in her cheeks. Yes, smile like that. Now that I've regressed, I'll make sure you keep living while smiling like that. The rumor that I'd killed a disciple of the Blood Heaven Blade demon spread fast through the cult. And as it spread, Leon's concern grew with it. It's chaotic, she said. Everyone I meet talks about you and Yang Po, and they talk about me too. Since she was the cause of the fight, talk was natural. Isn't it good to be famous? I said. We martial artists do all kinds of crazy things just to become famous. I don't like it, she said. You'll become even more famous in the future. What will you do then? I asked. She let out a light sigh, but her expression wasn't dark, because there was a positive change at the heart of this chaos. I'm worried because the Blood Heaven Blade demon values honor, she said. I hope he just lets it go. Who said that he values honor? I asked. Isn't it true? She said. Would someone who values honor leave his disciples' misdeeds unchecked? I said. Maybe he doesn't know, she said. That would underestimate his meticulousness, I told her. You always speak as if you know him well, she said. I know him and the other demon lords to some extent, I said, being the heavenly demon's son. I should investigate that much. She stared, wide-eyed, surely wondering when I'd done such research without her knowing. Then why does he leave their misbehavior unchecked? She asked. Though I knew the exact reason, it wasn't something I could explain to her yet, so I gave another she could accept. Because it's convenient, I said. What? She said. It's easier to handle greedy, selfish disciples than well-behaved ones, I told her. The Blood Heaven Blade demon hasn't appointed a chief disciple for a long time and keeps them locked in fierce competition, because it's easier to use them as expendables that way. Just wait, Young Po's vacancy will be filled within days. He's a scary person, that demon, she said. I'm more scared of the disciples, I said. They rush forward knowing exactly what kind of man their master is. I'm glad I serve you, young master, she said. Of course, how can they compare? I said. Leon, would you like a drink after a long time? Why are you so surprised? I asked, when she looked startled. Because it's not just a long time, she said. It's the first time. Until now, you haven't drunk with me. What on earth drove you to throw yourself in front of an attack for my sake? Let's go, I said. Let's drink until we drop today. I took her to Maga Village, a settlement that had grown around the main cult into a large city, and to the most expensive tavern there. It's a historic day, I said. Let's drink in a good place. I'm fine with a small, shabby place, she said, burdened by crowds, since eyes were always drawn to her, so I took her to a private room. How much can you drink? I asked. Not much, she said. Let's find out today. Don't worry. If you get drunk, I'll carry you. I'm heavy, she said. It's fine. Look at this arm. It's half the size of mine, she said. It's because I'm not flexing yet. Since it was our first time drinking together, I ordered plenty of good food, and she marveled it was her first time having these dishes. Try them all, I said. We can order more of what you like. You're busy guarding me and grabbing quick bites. From now on, pay attention to what you eat. With this body, she laughed. Even quick bites are fine. Quick bites make you gain more weight, I said. The more you care what you eat, the less you gain. To lose weight, you have to become a gourmet. But I knew the truth, that no matter what she ate, or even if she starved, she wouldn't lose weight, because that weight wasn't gained from food. Of course she knew it too, speaking that way thinking I didn't understand the side effects, when she could have made a slightly resentful joke about them. But though she'd grown up too early, she kept her innate kindness. Teach me your secret, she asked, looking at me intently. Not cooking, but how a person can change like this. I smiled faintly and asked whether she wanted to change too. Not really, but, she said, and emptied her glass. Who wouldn't want to? In her situation, the image of her childhood self always inside her, getting harder to bear when things got hard. If you return to your original self, I told her, you won't need such a secret. The world will revere you. She accepted the drink I poured and asked what I planned to do about the successor, surely because she saw the potential in me. Flattery is the only way to survive, I said, raising my glass, and she laughed and clinked hers against mine, telling me to be sure to melt the cult leader's heart. Though she claimed she couldn't handle alcohol, she drank quite a lot, and I paid the price for getting her drunk, carrying her back fully intoxicated while she shouted from my back that she'd definitely protect me. Just trust her. I wasn't worried at all, I said, but hearing you say it makes me worry. You must worry. You should worry, she said. But don't worry, I'll protect you. At that, a window opened nearby and someone shouted what foolish girl kept babbling nonsense, and I told the man poking his head out to let it slide for my sake. Who are you? He asked. I am the young master of the heavenly demon divine cult, I said, and a swift apology flew out. Terribly sorry, young master, the window closing faster than it had opened. Leon slept soundly on my back. I'm sorry for carrying you back so late. At my quarters, I laid her on the bed, stepped outside, sat with my legs stretched in the yard, and looked up at the moon. After the annihilation of my cult, I'd fallen into a deep defeat, a depression so heavy I couldn't sustain my life except by running toward the goal of regression. What if I hadn't met Seo Jin then, hadn't learned of the great regression technique? In the end, wouldn't I have killed myself, or sought out Hua Muki only to be cut down by his followers before I ever reached him? Yes, that's probably what would have happened. Lost in such thoughts, something suddenly caught the moonlight beside me, and when I slowly turned my head, a large blade hovered next to my face, my tense reflection caught in the massive dale. As it tilted, its owner revealed himself, the rough emaciated hand on the hilt showing wrinkles that testified to harsh years, sharp eyes glaring at me from beyond those valleys. It was the Blood Heaven Blade Demon. I was inwardly startled, having not expected him to come for me so suddenly. The blade aiming for my neck was his unique weapon, the Heaven Extinguishing Saber, listed among the 10 great weapons of the martial world, nicknamed Weapon Destroyer because it shattered most weapons on contact, and the cold demonic energy pouring off it enveloped the surroundings, the chilling cold standing every hair on my body on end. If that sword flew at my neck, could I avoid it? I couldn't easily answer. However profound my insights from the past life, my internal energy was still overwhelmingly lacking. Just as the tension peaked, the cold energy vanished in an instant. The Blood Heaven Blade Demon smiled slyly and poked my side with the hilt, asking why I did it, meaning why I killed his disciple. A moment ago his aura had been an assassin's, and now he poked me like a friendly old neighbor. Because he acted like a fool, I said. He stared at me with a piercing gaze, similar to my father's yet different. If my father's eyes were unreadable, his were clear, and in them I saw burning hostility. What kind of fool, he said, comes to pick a fight with the cult leader's youngest son? Precious enough to keep in one's eye without pain. The sword that had rested on his knee sprang up and aimed at my neck again. Should I cut off this head and see if it fits in the cult leader's eye, he said, to check if it hurts. The fierce killing intent conveyed his will, that it sounded like a joke but wasn't. I don't think my head would fit into my father's sharply narrowed eyes, I said, and as I stepped back, the energy on the blade quickly disappeared into the hilt. Amazing, to control such force so freely with that emaciated body. Then he drew a long line on the ground between us, with the Heaven Extinguishing Saber, a short vertical mark on the left end. From here to here is our young master, he said. From here to the end is me. The line divided 9 to 1, the 9 him and the 1 me, this being how much the cult leader cherished me. I drew a new line with my finger at about 1/3. No matter how much, I'm still his son, I said. This side is me, that side is you, elder. Now 7 to me and 3 to him. He grinned mischievously and asked whether we should test it, whether the cult leader would kill or spare him for taking my head. Aren't you underestimating the heavenly demon's paternal love, I said. That's why we should test it, he said, and the saber slid toward me again. I pressed the side of the dale with my palm, stopping it short of my neck, the edge cold. No matter how brightly he smiled, this coldness was his essence, and forgetting it meant death. No need to test it, I said. There are 2 sons, and only 1 elder. He smirked that this young master wasn't as foolish as his disciple. If your disciple had resembled you, I said, he'd still be alive. He patted my shoulder twice, said this old man had lived with misfortune all his life, so it was best not to see each other often. And with that he vanished, shooting up into the distant darkness. Once he was gone, I checked my side, where a bluish bruise marked the spot he'd poked. The shoulder pat the same, playful looking, but each impact like a string of heavy blows. Damn, that old bastard. Saying twice that he'd take my head to my father implied the thought genuinely lingered. He seemed capricious but wasn't, always meticulously calculating, and even his caprice was calculated, which made him a difficult opponent since knowing much about him didn't mean handling him well. Why did he come looking for me? As I told Leon, he didn't care about reputation. He came to see me because my performance in the arena had left an impression, and my wish for a hunt seemed unique, and since I'd killed his disciple he felt the need to test me, to taste whether I was sweet or bitter. To me he was spicy, a mere lick setting me ablaze, but a deliciously spicy flavor. Was my first opponent really the Blood Heaven Blade Demon? Maybe so. Perhaps your Tao stood out particularly well in the eyes of the heavens. The next day Leon came to me flustered, asking how she'd gotten back, her cheeks reddening when I said she'd carried me back. No, that I'd carried her. Was I very heavy? I'm sorry, she said. It'd be a lie to say you were light, I said, but not so heavy you need to apologize. Look at these arms. After exchanging jokes, she bowed her head and thanked me, and as she turned to go, she asked me to forgive her if she'd said anything wrong, since she honestly didn't remember. Don't worry, you made no mistakes, I said, and if you do next time, use the pardon right, the right to be forgiven even if you wrong me. I extended my hand, and when her large one took mine, I said, there, it's issued now. If you're giving it, why not 10? She said, I'll follow you for life. No, I said, just 1, so use it wisely. Yes, young master, she said, her eyes vanishing into her cheeks as she grinned. In life, if anyone needs forgiving, it's me, not you. You should issue me about 50 pardon rights. That night I sat alone practicing chi emission, and while detecting 3 places at once I sensed a presence to my left. Lately I'd been thoroughly enjoying figuring out what kind of person someone was through chi, scanning them head to toe, their height, their weapon, their level of martial arts. Just as I was about to examine this one the same way, the person slipped aside. Thinking it coincidence, I set my chi again, but the person moved to the opposite side, dodging it. Could they be avoiding it on purpose? This thin, subtle chi was something they shouldn't be able to detect, yet they kept dodging as if they could feel it. Who on earth was this? Curiosity got the better of me, and I kept emitting chi and stepped out of my room, practicing while moving, which took several times more mental strength than standing still. But in real combat, one would have to emit chi while moving and fighting. I felt the person retreating, chased after them, almost catching up but not quite, until I arrived at the pavilion in the inner courtyard. The moment I saw who stood there, I let out a sigh of relief. Father. The one who'd led me here with my chi was none other than my father. I knew it, he said. I was worried someone else had sensed my chi. What chi? He said. Even the dog sleeping under that wall would have noticed it. Dogs have good instincts, don't they? I said. But what brings you to my quarters? I was passing by, he said, though clearly he'd come to see me. To meet you by chance like this, I said. It seems we're destined to be connected. That's enough nonsense, he said. Yes, sir, I said, and closed my mouth and joined him in looking at the night sky. After a moment I asked when he'd decide the successor. In 100 years, he said. You're all far from it. Make it 100 days, I said. I think I'm ready. If that were so, he said, the Blood Heaven Blade Demon wouldn't have come looking for you. How did you know? I asked. It was a meeting between just the two of us. Yet he knew, which meant he was keeping an eye on me, and after all he knew, I'd been struck by the energy dispersing poison. Right after he met you, my father said, the Blood Heaven Blade Demon came to see me. What did he say? I asked. He wanted me to punish you. What? I said, taken aback. Did the Blood Heaven Blade Demon really go to my father asking my punishment? It was surprising, my father said. He's not the type to come to me with such a request, just because his disciple died. Why do you think he did it? I asked, pretending not to know, while guessing the elder's true intent. He wanted to test the relationship between my father and me, to see whether father would truly punish me and how, to find out if father considered me his successor. So I've decided to punish you, my father said. There's no reason to, I said. That disciple deserved to die. A reason can be made, he said. I drew my sword and etched a long line on the ground, marked a point about 10 steps away, and said the Blood Heaven Blade Demon had told me the length of this side represented how much father thought of him. Was this where he'd gotten his reason? Instead of answering, father asked about or talk at the hunting ground, whether I'd asked who he trusted most among the Demon Supremes. Yes, I said. He gave his answer now. I trust no one. I understood. This answer also revealed that the Blood Heaven Blade Demon's line was wrong. Which side are you on? He asked. Do you trust people or not? It depends on the person, I said. How can you tell what kind of person they are? He asked. You find out as you spend time with them, don't you? I said. That's a foolish thought, he said. The human heart is something you can never truly know. No matter how transparent someone seems beside you. Never think you truly know them. I suddenly thought of Leon, whom I thought I knew well yet kept discovering new sides to. Just like this principle. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Did you say we need to tighten the discipline within our cult? He asked. Yes, I said. Forget that nonsense about eradicating corruption, he said. Tell me your honest thoughts. Can I really speak honestly? I asked. Have you ever lied to me? He said. No, but this answer might come off as rude. Speak. Somewhere along the line, I said, I think we lost our demonic path. A trembling twitch passed under his eyes. It was not a thing to say in front of him. What do you think of the demonic path? He asked. What I think of it is, I said after a pause, that it is our cult's belief in striking down absolute evil. Perhaps it was an unexpected answer, for he turned to look at me with wide eyes. Our cult's belief in striking down absolute evil, he repeated. I do not think our counterpart is the Orthodox sect, I said. Then what is it? He asked. Absolute evil, I said. What I was about to say wouldn't be easily accepted by my father, but I conveyed it calmly. There exists evil in this world so cowardly, malicious, and dreadful that humans cannot bear it, an absolute evil that even demons would click their tongues and turn from. The righteousness and cooperation the Orthodox sect upholds may subdue minor evils, but cannot handle this absolute evil, because the Orthodox sect harbors forgiveness at its core, and as long as they cherish human beings, how can they deal with the evil that has abandoned its humanity and rampages madly? My father gazed at me, the first time I'd seen him so focused on my words, perhaps because deep down he harbored such thoughts himself. Weren't we the absolute evil? His eyes seemed to ask. No, father. I hope the heavenly demon divine cult of my world is not the absolute evil. I will ensure it is not. I continued, that we must find our reason for existence in being the only entity in the martial world that can eliminate cowardly malicious evil even more despicably and viciously, sometimes with the face of good, sometimes of evil. When the great evil the Orthodox sect cannot handle kneels before us trembling, then the true demonic path is established, and only then will the martial world truly bow before our cult, seeking our help when they cannot solve their own problems, because only the heavenly demon divine cult can save the martial world. I was certain my father had never thought of, nor heard, such ideas not learned within the cult but felt by me, wandering the whole Central Plains my entire life. If we do not properly establish the demonic path, I said, we will not last long, and for us to survive, we must punish ourselves. Even my father, adept at hiding his emotions, couldn't conceal his shock, the kind of man who'd throw a punch at someone's face to check if they were lying, yet now showing no reaction. Even 10 more blows would have drawn no response to the story I'd unfolded. He was deep in thought, and though I'd lived a longer life than he had, I couldn't guess what ran through his mind. But one thing I was sure of. Though only a few days had passed since my regression, both my father and I were already altering our destinies, turning toward a different future. Finally, he broke the long silence, asking whether there was more arrogance left to show. No, not today, I said, scratching my head with an awkward smile. I think I understand why the Blood Heaven Blade Demon came to me to punish you, he said. Why? I asked. He saw something in you, my father said. That's why he tried to test you through me. It seems he saw the potential for me to become the successor, I said. Or perhaps the risk of ruining our cult, he said. Either way, I said, that old skeleton has some insight. After gazing deeply at me, my father suddenly walked out of the pavilion with determined steps, telling me to follow. He led me to the deepest part of the Heavenly Demon Pavilion, a place I knew well from rumor, a small plaque hanging above a stone cave. Heavenly Cave. Startled, I asked whether he meant for me to enter, since this was a training cave for candidates to become the Heavenly Demon, not to be underestimated. Entering was as one pleased, but leaving was not. For those who couldn't overcome its trials never left, and the success rate was half of the Heavenly Demon's kin who entered having lost their lives there, so that even my ambitious brother never brought up entering himself. Yet everyone who became Heavenly Demon had passed through here at least once. I also entered at your age, my father said. So how long did it take you to get out? I asked. 2 months, he said. My goodness, I said. You want me to spend 2 months of my bright youth in this dark, damp place? Don't be mistaken, he said. It took me 2 months, but the average is 3 years. My father was rated the greatest martial talent among all heavenly demons in history, and I'd inherited the heavenly martial body from his blood. Father, why are you doing this? I asked. Didn't I tell you? He said. I intend to punish you. Isn't this too harsh? I said. Yang Po, whom you killed, will spend eternity underground, he said. With the cheers and applause of those he tormented, I said. But he'd already made up his mind. Then I recalled what he'd said during the hunt about hidden intentions. Do you not care if your son dies, or do you hope I come out stronger? If I couldn't survive, it was punishment, but if I did, it could be reward. Or were you protecting me from the Blood Heaven Blade Demon by sending me away, like a needle sticking out of a pocket? My father, who never revealed his thoughts, made his intentions impossible to read. When he placed his hand on the stone tablet beside the cave and injected his energy, the stone door opened. With a look that said stop complaining and go inside, I could no longer refuse. Fine, I said. I'll come out faster than you did, father. As the door closed, my father, with a cold yet irritating smile, told me to make sure I didn't die. I walked slowly along the passage of the stone cave. The interior had good ventilation, and thanks to light coming in from the top here and there, it wasn't dark. And judging by the elaborate craftsmanship, the place had been built by a very skilled artisan. At a certain point, I felt a subtle undulation in the surroundings, and in that instant I realized only a master with keen senses could detect that a high-level formation had been activated. On reflection, it was natural. Why hadn't those who died here escaped? If the gateway was difficult, they could have given up and left. It was because they couldn't escape this formation that they perished, since though it was easy to walk in, failing to pass the gateway turned it into a hellish formation with no escape. How long did I walk before a fairly large plaza appeared, a stone stele at its entrance explaining the first gateway? Slay all enemies without using sword energy or sword force. If you do not succeed within the time limit, you will be given another chance in 10 days. Those prepared should stand in the red circle. 10 days. What about food until then? Looking around, I saw a jar full of food grain pills on the wall. Eating that tasteless stuff for 10 days would drive me mad. Without hesitation, I stood in the red circle in the middle. After a while, with a clanking sound, dozens of wooden human-shaped dolls rose from the ground on all sides, the parts to be cut painted red, some at the neck, some the arms, some the legs. My body reacted instinctively, and the moment they rose, I moved, my instincts deciding which technique to use and what to cut first. The wooden dolls fell. The dolls weren't fixed in place, the floor plates moving to change their positions, and in the chaos, some dolls began to descend back down. No, I realized that if I missed those descending dolls, they'd never rise again, and the challenge would count as failure, so I started with them, the others moving fast to block my path, while I leapt over and swung. Their movements grew faster and faster, and at first I thought this gateway tested footwork, but it tested judgment, what to cut first. Quick, accurate judgment coming before footwork. The gateway was complex but not sophisticated enough to surpass my instincts, so I cut down all the dolls and safely passed. Before my regression, I'd never have passed this, even running and rolling and flying around like crazy. I understood why the test resumed only 10 days later, since only those who accurately remembered how the dolls moved and which went down when could form a strategy, while slow-witted challengers had to repeat it several times. Seeing the first gateway, I understood why the average breakthrough time was 3 years. As soon as I passed, the stone door to the second gateway opened, and before leaving the first, I found writing engraved on the exit wall, left by those who came before. Succeeded on the 9th try. I did it on the 16th try. This is madness. Succeeded on the 37th try, tears obscuring my vision from the long ordeal. Will I die here? I can't solve this. I resent my father. Damn it. I tried to turn back, but there was no way back. Succeeded on the 6th try. I dare to call myself the best. Among them I saw a familiar handwriting at the very bottom. Idiots. It was my father who had passed this gateway before me, and I couldn't hold back my laughter, since it seemed he'd passed on the first try. Even if it was a bit much, strictly speaking they were ancestors, yet he boldly cursed at them. Father, I also passed on the first try, I thought, and moved on to the second gateway. As expected, a stone stele stood in the second plaza. Using the sword hanging on the wall, cut the stone in half within 2 hours. You may use sword energy or sword force. If you do not succeed within the time limit, you will be given another chance in 20 days. Those prepared should stand in the red circle. This time the retry was 20 days, making the stage twice as hard as the first. Endure 20 days on food grain pills, I'd rather die. Resolving to succeed, I stood in the red circle and a stone table rose bearing an iron ball the size of an adult's head. The allotted time of 2 hours was far too long to cut a single iron ball, so there had to be a reason, and I inspected it. The smooth surface showing it wasn't ordinary iron but an artificial stone stronger than iron, so heavy I couldn't lift it without internal energy. Hundreds of swords hung on the wall, long and short, heavy and light, even flexible ones worn like a belt, so the intention was to choose well and attempt it many times. I took an ordinary well-made steel sword from the wall, stood before the sphere, calmed my mind, and struck hard. With a pleasant sound, the sword broke and flew away while the sphere went without a scratch. A very strong metal. I brought another and swung vertically, and again only the sword broke. As expected, it won't work just like this. I brought a new sword and infused it with internal energy, and a blue light shimmered along the blade, the manifestation of sword energy. Before regression at this age, I could use sword chi but couldn't manifest sword energy, only mastering its intricacies in my 30s. This is my first sword energy since regression. Every warrior's sword energy is a different color even practicing the same technique, and I always found it fascinating how the shade varied by person. I liked the color of mine, sometimes like the sea, sometimes the sky, a pleasant blue. As I was about to slowly cut the sphere with it, a sudden sense of incongruity struck me, and I quickly withdrew my internal energy, the sword energy vanishing. This is too easy, isn't it? At first glance, I'd thought the test was to see if challengers could manifest sword energy, since an ordinary steel sword and even sword chi couldn't cut the sphere, a test one couldn't escape until mastering it. But a late-stage expert who could use sword energy would cut through easily and pass. For one side too easy, for the other too hard, something felt off balance. With that in mind, I went to the predecessor's writings on the wall, cut it in one stroke with sword energy. I tried 89 times without sword energy, and failed every time. In the end, I used it. I cut it without using sword energy. How? I can't believe it. Damn it, I can't manifest sword energy. What should I do? It's been 200 days since I started studying it. The smell of food grain pills makes me nauseous. The claim above about cutting it without sword energy is a lie. I vote for it being a lie. What I wanted were my father's words, and indeed they were at the end. Damn it. To think he cursed like this, it must have been tough for him to keep a dignified appearance. But this time he'd added one more line. If you get angry, you lose. Get angry and you lose. Why add this when my father would otherwise have just cursed and left it like in the first trial? I went back to the stone stele. You may use sword chi or sword energy. Not use it, but may use it. It meant to try cutting without first, and only use it if absolutely necessary, which explained why the time was too long. 2 hours enough to cut hundreds of such stones, and the swords excessively many. This challenge was about cutting it without sword energy. My father's warning about anger or caution against manifesting it, since that makes the sword emit intense heat, and the 20-day retry confirmed it is more demanding than the first gate. I just had to cut it. Thank you, Father. Since I had to avoid sword energy, there was no time to waste. I went back to the sphere, and thinking I must cut it without sword energy made it look different. How exactly should I cut this? Vertically, horizontally, diagonally, with a swift sword or a heavy one? I tried various approaches, but only the unfortunate swords broke while the sphere stayed uncut. After failing about 30 times, I sat against the wall, half giving up. There must be a way. The merciless time ticked away. Less than one segment left. Do I have to try again in 20 days? I was half in despair. Should I just cut it with sword energy and pass? But since my father had left a message, I couldn't take the easy way. It's difficult, really difficult. Sitting there in despair, I inadvertently released my energy, the practice of energy release I'd learned from my father in the mountains. A strand extended from my body and touched the sphere. If you were a wild boar, you'd be cut in one strike. The energy slowly enveloped it, feeling its surface, and I suddenly opened my eyes wide. What? There was a fine line on the surface, one that couldn't be felt by sight or touch. Focusing all my attention, I felt it, my energy enveloping it like a bird nurturing an egg, striving to become one with the sphere, and the line extended around it and met again at the starting point. I stood and approached slowly, my energy still connecting me to the sphere, and with my eyes closed, I felt it and struck precisely along the line with my sword. I didn't strike forcefully. I focused on hitting the exact line without a hair's breadth of error. In the next moment, an astonishing thing happened. The sphere split in half. That line was a kind of weak point that could accurately divide it. And an even more amazing thing awaited me. From the hollow inside the split sphere, a single pellet rolled out. When I checked what had come out of the severed iron sphere, I nearly stopped breathing. A demon essence elixir, the miraculous pill the cult refined only once every 10 years. A divine medicine that poured a vast amount of internal energy into a demonic cultivator, the exact amount varying with the constitution and the mental method of whoever swallowed it. The elixir itself was extraordinary, but what astonished me more was the design of the sphere. Cut with sword energy rather than the blade, the heat would have sealed the hidden pathway and the elixir would never have emerged, so this was a reward reserved only for the man who cut it with steel and not with chi. In a moment when internal energy was the one thing I lacked most, it was a gift dropped straight out of the heavens. I thanked my father and the old man up in the sky both at once, then sat down and swallowed it. The elixir melted on my tongue and spread a tingling warmth through every blood vessel as I focused on my mental cultivation method and absorbed it. I had taken miraculous pills before in my old life, so dissolving this energy was nothing difficult, and thanks to my heavenly martial body I could pull in far more than an ordinary man. After 2 hours of circulating my chi, I opened my eyes. The spiritual energy soaked into my vessels, like rain into drought-cracked earth, and refined into pure internal energy stored deep in my dantian. When I stood and threw a single punch, the air tore with a cleaner snap and the impact rang through the cave hard enough to burst my own eardrums. And my laughter rolled off the stone walls. I had every right to it. A thought struck me. Was the lesson about releasing energy during the hunt meant to teach me to find the cutting line all along, and had my father passed this gate the same way? I shook the idea off. No matter how special he was, he could never have predicted I would enter the heavenly cave because of the Bloodheaven Blade demon, though perhaps he had guessed I would come eventually, and whether he wanted me to gain the elixir or simply to uphold the prestige of the cut. Thanks to him, I had seized a great opportunity. After circulating my energy once more, I moved to the next gate. The third gate told me to distinguish between life and death, and that failure earned another chance only in 5 days, and that shrinking window told me this was not a thing to be pleased about. The instant I stepped onto the red circle, a table rose with 10 herbs laid out, and a smile pulled at my face because this gate was about telling medicinal plants from poisonous ones. People in the martial world love to say beware of old men, children, and women, but the truly dangerous thing is poison, and while everyone knows that, few have actually studied how to tell the plants apart. I belonged firmly to those who had. Before my regression, I had boasted to Seogong that I could sketch a map of the Central Plains with my eyes shut, having crossed every corner of those lands hunting the core essence of the 10,000-year carp. And a man who did that knew every medicinal and poisonous plant there was. There was no need to read the notes my father had left. I picked the single harmless plant among the 10, and the table sank and rose again with a fresh set, because the test demanded 2 correct answers in a row so no one could pass by luck. 10 choices each time, both right, or you kept eating poison the rest of your natural life. The real answer was that you had to taste them to know. The toxin set just shy of lethal, so a wrong guess only left you writhing for days. A brutal method, but the best one. I plucked the harmless herb from the second batch, and the door to the next stage opened. Curious about my father, I went to the wall where past challengers had carved their words. A litany of suffering, men cursing that they would turn into poison itself, one weeping that he succeeded only on his 96th attempt, another lamenting his hair falling out. At the very bottom was my father's single line, telling fools not to trust luck. He had tasted the toxic herbs one by one from his first attempt, committing each to memory, walking out after 2 months. At least I thought my father and I had both kept our hair. The 4th trial was the final one, the stone tablet warning me to survive the illusionary formation of life and death, and that to die inside it was to die in reality. This time the carved words belonged to survivors, one swearing to hunt down whoever made the formation, others writing only of how terrifying and exhausting it was. My father's line carried no curse this time, only a single piece of advice. Do not rest. It read like a clue for the trial and like advice for an entire life both at once, and I decided to honor it in both senses. After circulating my chi until my inner strength was full, I stepped into the red circle, and the world around me changed into a wasteland so real that the sand running between my fingers and the insects on the rocks felt true to the touch. Truly there are geniuses in this world, to craft an illusion this convincing. Then warriors began to appear out of the carried sand, faceless illusions with no eyes or nose or mouth. 30 of them, and though they were illusions they had substance. Their swords as real as the rock I had touched. They surrounded me, pouring out murderous intent, the pressure heavy enough that a man without real combat experience would have shrunk back. But I had faced more opponents than this before, and felt almost at ease as I lunged into the gap. The fight opened with my sword punching through 2 chests at once, and I attacked without mercy after that, stabbing necks and bellies, snapping arms, smashing heads, feeling no guilt, because none of them were men. Each time one burst apart with a thunderclap, something in me eased. When the first 30 fell, I was granted a brief respite, and I was about to slow my breathing when I remembered my father's words. Do not rest. So that was what he meant. Not to refill my energy during the breaks, but to keep fighting as if this were a true battle, where there would never be time to calmly restore one's chi. This was a rare chance to practice controlling my reserves under pressure, and telling a man not to rest in the formation of life and death was advice only my father could give. I waited without recovering, and the next wave appeared, 20 now, fewer but far stronger and faster, armed with swords up close, bows from a distance, hidden weapons in the air. The fight pressed dangerously near to losing my life. And to be honest, I was thrilled, because it was the first real battle I had tasted since my regression. I ran across their shoulders, swatting flying needles out of the air, using the ones I subdued as shields, even fighting with my eyes closed, and when they fell I still did not slow my breathing, fighting meaning to spend only half of what I had left. The third set appeared, 10 of them, and I was certain they were the last, the ceiling of what any challenger could survive, surely the wave that had killed so many. They were stronger and faster than both earlier waves combined, and instead of fear, I felt only regret that it was ending so soon. When I judged the moment had come, my sword carved a dazzling arc. The soaring sword art reads differently depending on the eyes watching it, the weak dismissing it as a flashy trick, while the strong are struck dumb by the 7 sword styles hidden inside the brightness. And as the ultimate forms unfolded, the 10 illusions were swept away. The strongest the formation could offer extinguished the fastest, bursting like fireworks. With the last one gone, the formation shattered. My level was high enough that the desperate crisis my father intended never came, but it was a refreshing fight, and the anger packed into my chest loosened and dispersed. A door opened, and Estelle rose beside it, congratulating me on passing safely and asking me to use my strength for the revival of the Heavenly Demon Cult. So ended the test of the Heavenly Cave. I had passed it in a single day, and when word spread the main cult would be thrown into chaos, my father having taken 2 months while his son came out in 1, drawing far more suspicion than praise. Gupyongo would foam at the mouth, swearing I had cheated, and my father and the 8 Demon Supremes would tear their hair out wondering how it was possible. Endless trouble. So I made the only sensible decision and refused to go out. I would train here, exactly 100 days, to preserve my father's dignity, and there was plenty of training and an even more loathsome stack of food grain pills to chew through while I did it. I ran the soaring sword art over and over, the same art I had honed for a lifetime, yet wielding it through a rejuvenated body felt utterly new, which is exactly why they say no man sees the end of martial arts no matter how long he lives. Alongside it, I practiced the energy emission technique my father taught me, and worked to balance the power swollen by the demon essence elixir. And on the 97th day I could handle the increase perfectly, my chi emission grown to more than 10 threads at once. Not quite a spider's web, but close. For the last 3 days I calmed my mind and laid out the tasks ahead. On the 100th day, I pushed the stone slab aside and walked out into fresh air, bidding a glad farewell to the cursed pills. A martial artist from the Heavenly Demon Hall waiting at the exit startled badly, explaining he had been ordered to escort me straight to the Heavenly Demon Pavilion the moment I emerged, but had only just begun his watch that day, expecting to wait at least 100 more. So my father had calculated I would come out between the 100th and 200th day, his assessment of my talent, which meant he thought highly of me and had never believed I would die. The thought that the Heavenly Cave might have been less a punishment than a reward followed me as I trailed the man out. When I reached the pavilion, my father sat alone, and I walked the red carpet toward the throne. People call this carpet the path of blood, and I wondered how much blood my father had watched pour out to earn that seat. How much more would flow to keep it? He noted that I had taken exactly 100 days, and my lips twitched, because I had broken the gate in 1. Out loud I told him I had struggled but could not break his record, and when he asked whether I cut the rock properly, I said I cut it clean without losing my temper, that his clues were so clear I could hardly do otherwise, and that I had not rested in the final formation either. Then I saw it. A genuine smile of joy on his lips, gone the instant it appeared, because for my father a smile was always a mirage. He allowed I was not entirely an idiot, and I asked whose son he thought I was. The father I had known before my regression I had believed enjoyed the succession battle that risked his children's lives, but only now did I understand the truth, that he endured even the deaths of his children for the future of the cult. When I asked why he had summoned me, he called another man in first, Sima Myung, the strategist advisor, the one who held the highest authority under my father alone, head of the Heavenly Communication Pavilion and master of all intelligence across the Central Plains. He marveled that I had passed the Heavenly Cave in 100 days, and when I called it a punishment, he gave a knowing smile and wondered aloud whether it had been a punishment, a reward, or a punishment that failed to be won. Then he came to the point, an internal matter of the cult. He had called me instead of my brother to handle internal affairs, right after I left the Heavenly Cave, and when my gaze slid past him to my father on the celestial Zenith's throne, I understood the decision was his. A letter of accusation had arrived reporting corruption inside the demonic army, one of our cult's military organizations, infamous for the rough tempers of its men. I sighed inwardly, because the demonic army commander was none other than the younger brother of the Bloodheaven Blade Demon. Of course it was. A similar letter had come last year, Sima Myung went on, and the Underworld Pavilion had investigated, but no one testified. The investigator sent in was murdered, and the man who killed him conveniently committed suicide, so the case was shelved and forgotten. Now another letter had come, and they wanted me to serve as special investigator. There was no point asking why me. The whole thing reeked of danger, which meant it was a test from my father, and being caught for corruption in an elite force meant execution, so a guilty man would spare not even the son of the Heavenly Demon. And with the Bloodheaven Blade Demon already having warned me off, would I dare touch his brother's organization? I said plainly that they were shoving me into a death trap, and Sima Myung agreed it would require me to risk my life. I looked at my father, and his stern face reminded me that I had once said I would seize control of these organizations and tighten their leashes, words I had spoken on a hunting trip. I said that had been for when I became the Heavenly Demon, and when he asked whether I was too scared now, I admitted that if he put it that way, I could hardly refuse. He had preserved the Bloodheaven Blade Demon's honor by caging me in the Heavenly Cave, and now meant to keep that man in check through me, and I could not read his true intention. Then I remembered the hunting night, when I had asked whether he could kill me for the cult's sake, and he had warned me not to speak so casually of treachery. This was not really his decision, I realized. I had faced him differently, and this was the fruit of that choice. A path I had chosen too, so I told him I had spoken those grand words gazing up at splendid stars, and would take responsibility. My father smiled enigmatically at how cheerfully I accepted, and I resolved to dance a fine sword dance for him, whatever his plan. Sima Myung seemed surprised, asking if I was certain. I told him we could not let men rob our cult's storehouse, but that I had one condition, and I named it. Not only investigative authority, but summary execution authority, the privilege of killing a target during the investigation without being held to account. Since it was unprecedented, Sima Myung looked to my father, who nodded and granted it on the condition that I use it only with clear evidence. I thanked him for the difficult task and asked that if I died, my tombstone read that Mujuk was brave. He chuckled and said he would send an Underworld Pavilion investigator to assist me the next day, and I asked, if possible, for a beautiful lady. He laughed and remarked that the rumors of this young master showing a new side were true. After bowing, I glanced back and asked my father whether he would share a drink with the son facing his final moments. He did not even hear me out, only rising and walking off. And I grinned at Sima Myung and said that on the surface my father was prickly but in truth took good care of me. He said he did not appear that way in the slightest, and left, and I called after him that he was growing more and more like my father by the day. In front of those two, I joked and played the vibrant young man, because I had promised myself never to drag the darkness of my past into this second life. I would pass this test and take one more step toward the seat of the successor. The next morning, Leon told me the investigator had arrived and offered to come along, knowing how dangerous it was to investigate the demonic army. Instead of permission, I asked whether the investigator was pretty, and warned her against jealousy disturbing our cozy time, until she told me, with a look that doubted her own ears, that the investigator was a man. The person she guided in had a notably short build and an air of melancholy. And yes, he was very much a man, introducing himself as Seo Daryong, special investigator from the Underworld Pavilion. His name meant Great Dragon, which his physique flatly contradicted, and even his voice was small. I complained that I had asked for the most beautiful woman in the pavilion, and after a flicker of confusion, he shrugged and said that perhaps he looked like the most beautiful woman to him. Leon chuckled, and I let out a theatrical sigh, then told him to tell me what he knew about the demonic army, and that if he stammered I would show him a tragic fate. He answered as if he had waited all his life for the chance. The demonic army was 6 divisions under a single commander, obeying only the leader's direct orders. Each division 30 strong, 181 men counting the commander, with no deputy because the 1st division leader filled that role. He handed me a thick file of detailed profiles, and when I pulled a sheet at random and asked about a man named Zhong Pyo, certain he could not have memorized it, he told me at once that Zhong Pyo had been with the 1st Division 7 years, used a palm technique called Guhun Zhang, was ruthless, loved drink and gambling, and had caused several incidents the demonic army always covered up. I pulled another sheet, and he knew that man too, and when I demanded whether he had really memorized all 180, he corrected me to 181. I called him a genius, and he asked only that I credit it to effort, and beneath his gloom his sharpness was the edge of a real genius. He admitted when I prodded that he had entered the pavilion as the top student, then revealed he had neither a mirror nor a girlfriend, lacking the courage to resist an impolite superior. I laughed hard. Somehow I quite liked this man. He knew the commander cold. His name was Gu Cheon-young, the younger brother of the Blood Heaven Blade demon Gu Champa, and in 8 years he had run countless dangerous missions and built the demonic army into a respected elite force. Though he still stood in his elder brother's shadow, his face like Gu Champa's but missing the ardent cold flame. Then I asked to see the anonymous report. The handwriting was deliberately crooked to hide the writer, the message stark, declaring serious corruption and demanding an investigation. I posed Seo Daryong a question. Imagine you found out, would you send an anonymous report? He answered without hesitation that he would not because it had nothing to do with him, but because sending one would change nothing. There was a defeatism in that flat reply that suited his gloom too well, and when I asked whether the pavilion did not exist to change the cult, he said they were only the sword used by those who wanted to change it, not the agents of change. I noted that whoever sent the report believed he would die if caught. You could tell from the disguised hand, yet sent it anyway, and Li On suggested it was not justice that drove him, but a grudge against the corrupt. That made sense. We had to find this man, I said, because if we looked weak, he would never come forward. I asked whether Seo Daryong was scared, reminding him the last investigator had died, and he said the dead man had been his immediate superior, the one who taught him everything. A quiet sadness sat under his words, and I understood now why he had memorized every detail of the demonic army. He wanted to avenge his senior. I told him the death had not been meaningless, that it had brought us here, and that he should be scared, because these were men with nothing left to lose. He said he did not want to be scared of such filthy people. A great anger lay sleeping in that small body. As I left with him, Li On followed and begged to come, but I refused, telling her it was an official mission and to rest. She needed to stay far from me. She watched us go with worry, then glanced around in confusion, because I had stretched my energy out to gently pat her head from behind. Don't worry, Li On. I have come a very long way for days, exactly like this. The Demon Dragon Court, where the demonic army lived, sat in the western district of the main school's outer grounds, large and well appointed as befit an elite force. When we reached the entrance, 2 gatekeepers built twice the size of ordinary men blocked us. Seo Daryong announced himself as the Underworld Pavilion's special investigator and ordered them aside, full of nerve despite his small frame. But they only mocked him, one muttering that the special investigator did not look very special, the other insisting no one entered without permission. Seo Daryong produced the order and said the higher authorities stood right here, and as their voices climbed, when one called the whole thing nonsense, Seo Daryong kicked him in the shin without a moment's pause. The man clutched his leg and raised a fist, but did not dare strike an investigator, since that meant instant imprisonment, though he muttered that perhaps he should just beat this rat and pay the compensation. This was exactly the level of the demonic army, and not just them. Many in our cult lived on impulse with no restraint at all, having lost the clear ideology of the demonic path, if we ever truly had it. A collection of wicked people bound by the mistaken faith that brutality and strength were justice and truth, and if someone leveled that charge at us, I could not refute it. After watching long enough, I stepped in and asked whether they knew who I was. Even then, they did not back down, and I told them that if they truly knew it was me, they would never behave this way, then drove my foot into one man's groin with everything I had, since the shin had not worked. He crumpled, screaming, and as I asked the other whether he had really been talking about paying compensation in front of me, my fist put that huge man down in a single blow. Seo Daryong stared, stunned that I would openly beat the demonic army, and I told him to stop standing around and lead the way. Before we could reach the main building, a knot of members blocked the path, and Seo Daryong raised the command letter and asked whether they all wanted to rot in prison for obstruction. They only sneered, looking down on him for his height, until the group parted and a man stepped out, naming himself Godang, leader of the 1st Division. Seo Daryong sent me a telepathic message that this was effectively the second-in-command, one of the most notorious of the demonic army, and Godang caught his lips moving and snarled that the bastard had a death wish, daring to send a secret message in front of him. They ignored me because the demonic army backed my brother, even the commander supporting him, which let them disregard me openly. Seo Daryong held firm, and I liked him for it, because after the trash from the Blood Heaven Blade Demon's line and the swaggering demonic army, watching him stand his ground felt refreshing. When he threatened to arrest the lot of them, Godang and his men roared with laughter and dared him to try, the kind of men who would not have flinched even before enforcement martial artists. And Seo Daryong glanced back at me, out of moves. Time for me to step in. I walked up to Godang and seized his hand firmly as if greeting a welcome face, asking warmly when we had last met, and saying how good it was to see him, then told him I urgently needed the commander, and that we should drop the territorial games. The path opened naturally and we went through together, still hand in hand, while Godang's men looked puzzled at how easily their leader had yielded. We parted at the stairs, and when Seo Daryong, amazed, asked whether I knew Godang, I said I had met him for the first time today, and that the man would be eating with his left hand for a while, because I had broken his hand when we shook. He was so shocked he shouted, He asked why Godang had not simply ordered his men to attack, and I explained that to do so would have revealed his hand was broken, the embarrassment of it unbearable in front of his subordinates. That was not the only reason. When Godang tried to retaliate, I had sent him a quiet message that if he acted up he would never use that hand again, and given the precedent of the disciple's arm I had ruined, he was frightened. I told Seo Daryong that ill-tempered Godang would not sit still, and if he attempted retaliation, his head would burst and he would die. A prophecy. Seo Daryong looked at me with new respect, started to remark on my personality, and trailed off. And when I asked whether the word was dirty, he fell silent, simply unable to lie. I told him being disliked by some could mean being liked by others. There were men blocking us even at the office door, telling us no one met the commander without an appointment. Not wanting to watch Seo Daryong wrestle them, I took the order and held it up, showing the emblem of the heavenly demon, and told them that to block this order was to block not us, but the Lord himself. At the mention of my father, they flinched, and when I asked whether they meant to take the Lord lightly too, whether I should report it that way, they scrambled to deny it, until a voice from inside told them to let us in. Seo Daryong must have realized then how he should have handled the gatekeepers, that the authority of the heavenly demon existed precisely for moments like this. Demonic Army Commander Gu Cheon-yang was an ordinary build of a man, but his aura could cower even the largest of his soldiers, though he stood in his elder brother's shadow. I remarked that he was harder to meet than my own father, and he apologized for his men's rudeness, calling them inherently ignorant. I said they had nothing to do but pick fights, and that perhaps he should make them read books, and he answered that ignorance was a form of bravery, and I told him that was an old saying, that these days the knowledgeable were braver. Even in this small exchange we were locked in a battle of wills, the commander seasoned by the cult's politics, untouched by anything I said. He asked why I had taken charge of the investigation, and I said my father seemed to want to punish me for a mistake on a hunting trip, and he nodded with sudden understanding, having no doubt spun a dozen hidden motives behind my arrival. He asked whether there was another anonymous letter, feigning indifference though inside he had to be nervous, because the underworld pavilion was not a place to brush off. I told him I could not disclose details, and when he pressed whether I could not tell him even that much, using the phrase between us so naturally, I marveled at the brazenness it took to sit at the center of the cult's faction wars, and I told him honestly that yes, a letter had been received. He said it was just as he thought. Beside me, Seo Daryong's eyes asked whether I was really telling him everything, and mine answered that it was fine, which curled the commander's lips because such openness looked amateurish to him, working entirely to my advantage. I explained the pavilion was bound to dispatch an investigator whenever such a letter arrived, and he claimed his innocence smoothly, saying leading rough men inevitably drew slander. I countered that slander took some cleverness, and would ignorant men even think to send a letter, and he warned that ignorant men were unusually ambitious, that even I should be careful, because when ignorance and ambition combined, things that should never happen could indeed happen. Despite the threat, I kept my smile, asking him to bear the inconvenience while I finished quickly, and when I asked whether it was not well known that the Bloodheaven Blade Demon supported my elder brother, he said a brother was a brother, and he was himself, that he supported me. At the blatant lie, I smiled broadly and said just hearing it was reassuring. As I rose to leave, he added an afterthought, telling me to be careful out of genuine concern, and when I asked whether it would be like last time, when an investigator was murdered, he said the Lord would surely never send me here to die. I laughed and took my leave. By the heat on the back of my head, his expression must have been quite rigid. Then you had better be careful, I thought, because my father sent me, which means either you or I is meant to die. While I traded barbs with the commander, the strategist advisor Sima Myung was elsewhere, watching the heavenly demon Jian Wujin tend to his sword. He remarked it had been a while since my father brought out the Black Demon Sword, one of the 4 great swords of the cult, the finest being the heavenly demon sword my father always carried, then the Black Demon Sword, then the Evil Spirit Sword, and last the White Flower Sword, each with its own nature, the Black Demon Sword rough and destructive. When Sima Myung asked whether my father meant to give it to the young master, my father's hand paused before resuming, saying that if I was fortunate I would take it. Sima Myung guessed it would be my reward if I handled the situation well, but he could not understand the decision, for he did not think my recent actions enough to take on the demonic army, and so he was certain the Black Demon Sword would return to the treasure vault. He felt he should have handled the matter himself, since the murder of the previous investigator made it clear the commander had bought or blackmailed the head of the Underworld Pavilion, and he had meant to resolve it through his own heavenly communication pavilion. Then my father said something unexpected, that I had told the commander our cult had lost its demonic path. Sima Myung startled, for those words insulted not only the heavenly demon but Sima Myung himself, and he felt more anxiety than displeasure, as he asked whether that was why my father meant to have me killed. My father only said that if a man talks that big, he needs to back it with action, which sounded to Sima Myung like a verdict that I had to answer for my arrogance. He watched my father clean his blade, a man who had sent his own blood to die without a flicker, and asked whether he meant for me to retrieve the lost demonic path myself. My father said it seemed so. Sima Myung said that if it was based on my recent actions, it might be worth looking forward to, then took his leave with a polite bow, glancing back as he crossed the carpet. Though my father seemed indifferent to whether I lived or died, the care with which he cleaned that sword was more devoted than ever, and Sima Myung wondered whether he truly believed I could deal with the commander. Yet when he reached the end of the red carpet, he came to his conclusion all the same. The black demon sword would return to the vault. In the room the demonic army gave us, we stood in disbelief, the place uncleaned, dust everywhere, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. When Seo Daryong called it incomprehensible that they would treat me this way, I explained that in their eyes I was a man destined to vanish from the succession battle, and to be pushed out of that battle meant death. And worse, anyone close to me risked being purged alongside me. I pointed at him and drew my hand across my throat, but he did not seem to mind. He said that out of respect for the cult leader they should not treat me so, and I told him my father did not care about such things. That in fact he watched it all with interest, and that this room was likely Godong's doing, not the commander's. Seo Daryong muttered the petty man held quite a grudge, and I said he was only shortening his own life. We cleaned the place thoroughly together, he insisting despite my telling him to step out, glancing at me again and again, puzzled that I would clean with my own hands, though if he knew how hard my life had been before regression, he would understand this was nothing. Afterward he fetched fresh bedding and asked whether I really meant to sleep here, and I said we needed to catch whoever sent the letter, and staying here improved our odds. He offered to stay alone so I could rest in my quarters, and I joked that some pervert wild for small-built men might break in at night, and he took it seriously and said we should sleep together, and when I asked what if I were that pervert, he said he would reveal his own hidden feelings too, and the dull man's joke sent a cold wind through the room. Anyway, I was hungry, and we went to eat. Stepping out we found Godang waiting at the entrance, his broken hand heavily bandaged. I pretended not to notice and greeted him cheerfully, exclaiming over his injured hand and asking how such a thing could happen to a great man like him. He glared like an enraged beast, swearing he would never forget my cowardly act. He believed I had ambushed him, and if he never realized the outcome would have been the same in open combat. His future schemes against me would be a tightrope walk over his own grave. I feigned ignorance, and he ground his teeth, sneering that some imagined noble blood meant a knife would never reach their belly, and I asked whether he could even hold a knife with that hand. He snarled that we would see whether the knife fell or my guts spilled, and I only waved with a smile as he stormed off seething. Seo Daryong asked whether I was provoking him too much, and I said Godang was the one who provoked me, since he had waited there to threaten me and spoke first of stabbing me in the stomach. He admitted that was true. I told him Godang was a villain, and we tend to find reasons to understand such men, which is foolish, because we should hold them to a far stricter standard, and instead of bowing his head, this villain wanted so badly to die he could barely stand it. Since we had met such an unsavory creature, I declared we would treat ourselves to the most expensive meal there was, and when Seo Daryong showed no excitement, apologizing that he did not much enjoy eating, I told him to go eat noodles then. He truly had a small appetite, leaving half the dish, though nothing was wasted since the leftovers ended in my stomach anyway. When we returned, we stared at the bed for a moment. 2 dead crows lay on it. Seo Daryong, already gloomy, offered to get new bedding, but I told him to grab the crows and follow me because we needed dead crows more than live ones. He followed with the crows and a puzzled face, and I told him to hang them right in the center of the hallway where the demonic army passed most. The moment he did, the commotion drew them swiftly, most frowning and cursing, demanding what it was, why anyone would hang dead crows and bring bad luck, cursing the unlucky bastards from the underworld pavilion, one saying that spot was perfect for a torn-apart corpse. Their uniforms bore numbers marking each division, so it was easy to tell the first division men, the ones from the entrance, were the loudest cursers, and cursing the pavilion was as good as cursing me. Just as the air turned hostile, one man stepped forward, asking whether this was not going too far, and I asked who had spoken, saying they all looked equally ugly to me. He stepped forward again and named himself Jang Ho, the 3rd Division leader, the largest of all the demonic army, a long scar across his face. Seo Daryong sent me a sound transmission that Jang Ho, called the 3rd leader, was held to be the strongest of the 6 leaders. His temperament far from ordinary, and his presence really was overwhelming, the dark energy rolling off him stealing our breath for a moment. He asked what displeased him about hanging something ominous where men walked, and I asked whether it was not better than throwing them on someone's bed, and he told me to stop ruining everyone's mood and punish whoever did it. I conceded he made a valid point, and told investigator Seo to take them down. Seo Daryong removed the crows while the watching demonic army openly mocked him as a coward who would only listen once beaten, and ignoring the laughter, we returned to the room. The moment we entered, his face red with wounded pride, he asked why I had hung them up only to take them down so easily, and I told him I had wanted to find out who sent the anonymous letter. When he asked, baffled, whether I had found out, I said yes, and his eyes widened. And when he asked how, I looked at the crows and told him it was thanks to these fellows, and that he should give them a proper burial. The next day, the full investigation began. I gathered the 3rd Division in one place, and since Jang Ho had been tangled in the crow incident, his displeasure was obvious. He demanded the meaning of it, and asked why I started with his division instead of the 1st, and I told him because I wanted to. When he asked whether I held a grudge over yesterday, I asked what had happened yesterday. I told him to submit all records, that we would investigate every financial account, and his men began to murmur, because even ordinary people carry dirt if you dig deep, let alone the demonic army, where the kindest man present would still rank as a minor gang boss. Jang Ho roared that even I could not do this, and I said, "Oh, but I could," and he smashed the desk in front of me. I warned him that rebellion was a grave crime, and at the word a few of his men rushed to restrain him. I provoked him further, saying we would begin with the leader, and he shouted that we should settle it outside and ordered everyone to leave, power swirling around him. His subordinates pleaded with him not to be agitated, but he sent them out and they glared at me with frightening eyes before going. It was clear they followed him out of genuine trust, not fear. When the room emptied, Jang Ho promised coldly I would regret this, the scar twisting across his face, and I watched him in silence, then lowered my voice and quietly asked how long he intended to keep testing me. He flinched, and when I asked whether he was not the one who sent the anonymous letter, his pupils shook. He was a poor liar, his voice trembling after his eyes did, and soon he admitted it and asked how I knew. I told him that yesterday he had stepped forward when nothing required it, surely to deflect the commander's suspicion, that his subordinates were the most disciplined of the 6 divisions and the only ones who refrained from cursing at the crows, and that just now he had stepped forward out of care for them. And a man who ran an organization like that would find it hard to overlook the corruption rotting inside it. In truth, that was not quite how I worked it out. The moment Seo Daryong told me Jang Ho was the strongest leader, I remembered something from before my regression, that around this time, one of the demonic army's leaders had died, the one said to be their strongest, and I had wondered why a man with such power would die. I was certain now it had been Jang Ho, that he sent the letter, tried to settle the matter internally when the investigation failed again, and was killed by one of his own. He confirmed it, saying he had not dared include details because he was unsure the letter would even work, having suspected even the underworld pavilion might be under the Bloodheaven Blade demon's influence, and that he had never imagined I would come investigate in person, admitting he had thought they were doomed when he heard I was coming. I turned to Seo Daryong and asked whether honesty was the trend among young people these days, and he reminded me I was younger than both of them, and I conceded. Then I asked Jang Ho what was going on here. The commander, he said, was using the demonic army for personal gain, taking money to deploy his men as assassins for hire. Even I, who rarely startle, was shocked, because with masters like the demonic army on the move, it would not be for small sums. Seo Daryong asked how it was possible, and Jang Ho explained the men were sent out under cover of vacation or special training. Unlike Seo Daryong, I saw the one way it could work, and said the entire 1st Division was in on it. Jang Ho was astonished at how fast I deduced it, and I explained the 1st Division stopped us first, cursed loudest at the crows, and moved as one whenever anything happened. Just as I had said, you can read everything from a single action. Then I asked how he found out. The warrior who killed the previous investigator, and then supposedly committed suicide, had been his friend, the very man who sent the first letter. Except he had not killed himself. He was forced to, having told Jang Ho about the letter days before his death. In my old life, I had never known of this case, only of Jang Ho's death, which meant the case stayed buried. He said they joined the cult at the same time, that the man was like family, and that after the killings the survivors were monitored so brutally they could barely breathe. He believed it was on the commander's orders, carried out directly by Gadang. If true, this was an enormous scandal embracing both the commander and the entire 1st Division, the murder of an investigator and the framing of the whistleblower, the largest crime in our cult's history. Had my father or Sima Myung not known, they must have suspected, which was exactly why they sent me, to test whether I could stand against the commander knowing I might die. Father, I thought, the saying that a lion throws its cubs off a cliff is a lie. When the cubs fall, the beast races down to catch them and carry them back up. I told Jang Ho he had a good friend, and he said the friend was the good one, that if he himself were a good friend he would have stepped up when the man died, and I told him that would only have made him a foolish friend. Not all of the demonic army were scum. Seo Daryong, watching, seemed moved too, since the dead investigator had been a senior he respected, and both men had lost someone close in that same incident. Looking at them, I felt there was still hope for the lost demonic path, that the heavenly demon cult I envisioned would be a place where men like them held important seats. I thanked Jang Ho for his courage, and he said he had decided to trust me when I unraveled it all at once. I asked whether there was anything troublesome in his records, and he said I could dig as deep as I liked without finding a speck of dust, and I told him everyone has dust, that even what looks harmless can be turned into dirt, but that I would not dig that deep. I walked out, where the 3rd Division men waited, and announced that Leader Jang had decided to hand over all records on their behalf, so they could go back. Jang Ho played along, shouting that they should just wait, that if he was innocent he would not stay silent, his eyes full of gratitude. By taking the investigation onto himself, he made them trust him all the more. The Jang Ho of my old life had died, but this one would not. Saving those who should not die was the very purpose of my return. As I shut the door, Seo Daryong remarked that I seemed quite different from the rumors. I told him to be honest, that he was only relaying what he heard, and he said they claimed I did not fit the heavenly demon cult, and apologized. I told him it was fine, even a compliment, because would it really be praise to fit our current cult? I believed ruling through fear was outdated and that our cult needed to change. A glimmer of light crossed his eyes at the word change, though he soon said gloomily that change was not as easy as it sounded, and I agreed. When he asked whether I would try to change the cult if I became the heavenly demon, the truthful answer was of course, because if it did not change, my family would be destroyed and the cult sealed off from the world. But instead I said I would rather travel the central plains and have fun than become the heavenly demon. I half meant it. Once I killed Hua Mugi, I planned to wander and enjoy myself to the fullest. He said everyone else would sell their souls for the seat, and asked whether I thought him ungrateful, and I told him he thought so because he was a power-oriented man. He widened his eyes in indignation, and I suddenly asked whether helping someone made him happy, and he answered no, and whether a promotion made him happy, and he answered yes, then sighed and mocked himself for being a power-oriented man after all. I told him everyone has different conditions for happiness, money or power for some, a quiet life for others, chivalry for a few. He asked whether one could really be happy practicing chivalry, and whether that sounded insincere, and I said yes, because in my past life I had met such a man. So selfish he wore the mask of chivalry to deceive even himself. Never virtuous, yet convinced to the last that he walked the chivalrous path. Such men unsettled me more than the openly ambitious, but I never criticized them, since that too was a way of living. And there are many in the martial world who genuinely live by chivalry, men too great to measure with hearts as small as ours. He sighed and said that as a power-oriented man he simply did not get it, and I chuckled because to his peers he might be annoying. But to me this side of him was endearing. I told him to stop the ill-fitting self-reflection and go dig up Jang Ho's records, moderately, and to bring more investigators from the Underworld Pavilion so we could build the atmosphere of a thorough investigation. He understood, and I stood by the window looking out, and there, across the way, I saw the demonic army commander watching from the building opposite. Our eyes met, but I pretended not to notice, because what I was truly looking at was not his insignificant figure, but the distant heavenly demon pavilion that lay beyond him. In the afternoon, Seo Daryong brought over a dozen investigators, and as it began to look like a full-scale investigation, the demonic army grew agitated, rumors spreading that Jang Ho would thoroughly search everyone. That very evening, an incident broke out. An investigator came running to fetch me, and when I reached the place, the hallway before the investigation room was a complete mess. A fight having erupted between the demonic army and the investigators. I put myself between them and stopped it before it could truly kick off. One investigator lay on the ground, his face torn and bleeding, his ribs clearly broken, and Seo Daryong, enraged, had stepped in only to be beaten down himself. I told him to get the wounded man to the medical room quickly, and the others carried him off. The instigator, the 1st Division leader Godang, stood there shamelessly surrounded by his own men and enjoying it, and when I asked whether he had done this, he said yes. I remarked it felt like a prophecy was about to come true today, and Seo Daryong swallowed hard. So Godang made his own prophecy, that this young master would be expelled from the cult after losing the air battle, and end up living off the righteous sects of the Martial Alliance. And his men laughed heartily. Instead of anger, I was delighted, calling it splendid, because even having lost, I survived and got to live off others without working. The dream of every man. And I thanked him for it. His face stiffened as he realized he was being mocked. When I asked why he had injured the investigator, he said the man bumped his shoulder without apologizing, and that he taught him manners as a favor to me, and I told him his own shoulder had been the one to hit, and that even an apology would not have spared the man. Godang laughed without denying it, and I said one word: poison. Puzzled, he asked what I meant, and I told him his subordinates were a poison to him, because as long as they watched he would not back down out of pride, and pride that led to his own downfall, counted as arrogance. I reminded him that last year he killed one of our cult's martial artists with the same excuse, and the year before started a tavern brawl and killed 3, all low-ranking men whose deaths the demonic army covered up. His eyes told me plainly that he saw me as just another fool lacking respect for his seniors. Then I asked whether he knew what I had received coming here besides the authority of an investigating officer, the summary execution authority. At those words the surroundings fell quiet, but Godang only sneered, asking what good authority was without the ability to use it, and his men burst into renewed laughter. This was exactly the poison I had meant. A fool conscious of the eyes around him shows off when he should be terrified, and Godang alone was unaware of the grand stage I was building for him. As I stepped closer, his men rushed forward, warning that touching them meant touching the demonic army, and I said at least I did not hide behind my subordinates. Godang raised his bandaged right hand and said he was injured because of a certain coward, and I raised my own right hand and swore I would not use it or my sword. He flinched, then asked whether I would run crying to the heavenly demon if I got hurt, his men laughing harder, and the more they laughed, the hotter the stage grew. I told him that not only would I hold no one accountable if I got hurt, but even if I died the blame would fall on no one, and I knocked twice on my sword as an oath. Only then did he accept, drawing his blade and holding it in his left hand, confident he could wield it as well as his right, while I walked forward slowly with my right hand clasped behind my back. When he seemed afraid I might use it in desperation, I told him that if I did, He could order his men to kill me together, and he scoffed that I had grown confident from a playful match with the disciples of the Southern Heavensblade family. I told him his antics were more amusing, and he charged. I treated the duel as training, since a real fight with a division leader was invaluable experience. Godang held nothing back, and every time his sword missed, sighs of disappointment rippled around us, the watchers thinking I narrowly escaped while my mind sat as calm as a lake. I could have handled him with my left hand alone, so the only real question was how many moves. I settled on 40, since I had beaten the Bloodheaven Blade Demon's disciple in about 20, and 40 against a division leader would seem reasonably balanced, for the rumor that would spread. On the 40th move, I closed in and grabbed his sword wrist, and when he tried to wrench free, my body spun and his arm twisted like wet laundry being wrung out, a bone popping from the wrist. He screamed, my fist drove into his face, and he fell. I climbed onto his body and struck down with my left fist, without a threat of chi, because with it, the blow would have killed him. One onlooking soldier charged me, and while sitting on Godang's stomach, I drew and swung my sword almost idly, splitting the man's lower abdomen so he fell forward. No one expected me to cut him down in a single stroke, and everyone stared in shock. Two of Godang's most foolish followers drew and charged, and I sprang up and thrust twice, their swords grazing me while mine pierced their necks, both falling in fountains of blood. In an instant, the place became a sea of blood. 3 comrades turned to corpses, and the rest hesitated, and when I shouted that the crime of those who just died was treason, they froze. I walked to the fallen Godang and told him his crime was no different, that he had severely injured a man sent by the cult leader. Looking down coldly, I asked whether he knew what had happened to the families of the people he killed in that tavern brawl, who lost fathers and children and husbands while he never cared. Who was he to kill our cult members? He begged me to spare him, his bloodied face full of the desire to live, swearing he would repent, blood gushing from his mouth. Lies, I told him. He would only do it again, and when he swore never, I reminded him he had already said he would, and that his past life said it all. I lifted my foot and stomped down with all my might, and his head burst like a watermelon, and he died. For a moment, silence fell. No one had imagined I would smash the head of the man the commander favored most. I shouted to the surrounding soldiers that treason was punishable by summary execution, asking whether they still meant to hold their swords, and they collectively sheathed them, their leader dead, overwhelmed by martial prowess that had slain 3 of them in single strokes. I ordered the entire 1st Division to withdraw and reflect until further orders, and that anyone who stepped out of their room would be punished for treason, and they did not dare refuse. The watching investigators stared at me with astonishment mixed plainly with joy and admiration.